Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. It had been hours since I had left the last town, and the road ahead seemed endless, stretching out in front of me like an infinite ribbon of asphalt. The night was as quiet as it gets in the middle of nowhere, with only the sound of my truck's engine humming as I drove through the vast, empty stretch of highway. I was heading to a new job in a town a few hundred miles away, and the solitude of the journey was both peaceful and a little unsettling. There was something eerie about being so far from civilization, but I tried not to think about it as the miles ticked by. It wasn't until the engine started sputtering that my calm was broken. I'd been driving for a few hours without issue, but suddenly the truck began to lose power, the engine jerking and sputtering like it was about to stall. My heart skipped a beat as I gripped the wheel tighter and tried to push the gas pedal, but it didn't respond. The truck began to slow down on its own, despite my efforts to coax it forward. The dashboard lights flickered, and I could feel the engine stuttering like it was gasping for air. I cursed under my breath, realizing I was stranded on a desolate stretch of highway with nothing but darkness around me. I eased the truck to the side of the road and put it in park, my pulse quickening. I had no idea what had gone wrong, but the first thing I needed to do was check under the hood. I got out of the truck and shut the door behind me, feeling the cold night air hit my skin. There were no lights in sight for miles, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The vast emptiness was unnerving, but I had more immediate problems to worry about. I popped the hood and peered inside, trying to make sense of what had happened. The engine looked fine at first glance, nothing seemed out of place. No loose wires or signs of obvious damage. I stood there, squinting in the dim light of the truck's interior, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. It could have been a fuel issue, maybe a problem with the fuel line. But nothing seemed to explain why the truck had just stalled so suddenly. I was at a loss, wondering if I should call for roadside assistance, but the thought of waiting for help out here in the middle of nowhere didn't sit well with me. As I stood there, still pondering what to do next, I noticed something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. In my rearview mirror, I saw headlights approaching from behind. I hadn't heard a vehicle before, but now, the bright lights were growing closer. I turned toward the road, hoping to see another vehicle, maybe someone who could offer help. The truck's engine was still idling, and I was beginning to wonder if I should flag the car down when something strange happened. The truck's headlights didn't seem to get any closer. In fact, they seemed to hover in place, staying the same distance away, as if the car was driving at the exact same speed as me, but never closing the gap. I glanced back and forth between the headlights and the empty stretch of road ahead. The car was still there, its headlights glaring, but it didn't seem to move forward, no matter how much time passed. My breath caught in my throat. I was no expert, but this wasn't normal. A car that didn't overtake you on a stretch of road like this didn't make sense. I took a few cautious steps toward the truck, still watching the headlights in the rearview mirror. But there was no sign of the vehicle pulling up behind me. It just hovered there in place. I felt a strange compulsion to get back in my truck, but something held me in place, rooted to the spot. I couldn't take my eyes off the headlights, even though they didn't seem to make any sense. I kept expecting the car to pass me, to drive around the truck, but it didn't. The silence of the night seemed to grow heavier, and the headlights glowed brighter, like they were burning into my mind. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, as I stood frozen in place, staring at the lights. Then, Just as suddenly as they had appeared, the headlights flickered and went dark. The truck was gone. I blinked, almost not believing what I had just seen. In the span of a few seconds, the vehicle had disappeared into the nothingness of the highway, vanishing as if it had never been there at all. My heart raced as I quickly glanced down the road, but there was nothing. Not a single sign of another car, not even a trace of light in the distance. It was as if the headlights had never existed. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to process what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Was it some kind of mirage, the result of too much time spent alone in the dark, my mind playing tricks on me? I didn't know what to think. The emptiness of the highway stretched out before me, and for a moment, I wondered if I was losing my mind. But the fact remained, the headlights had been there, and then they were gone. I didn't waste any more time trying to make sense of it. My truck still wasn't going anywhere, and I had no way of knowing if the vehicle that had appeared behind me had been real or some kind of strange illusion. I climbed back into my truck and locked the doors, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. There was no cell service out here, and the only option left was to wait. I didn't feel safe standing outside, but I couldn't stay in the truck forever. A few minutes passed in silence. I had already started to tell myself that maybe it was nothing, just an odd coincidence. But then, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer to the side of my truck. My breath caught in my throat as I turned to look, but there was nothing outside. No one there. The footsteps faded, and once again, I was left in the silence of the highway. Only this time it felt much more oppressive, as if the road itself was alive and waiting for something. I sat there, watching the shadows move in the dim light of the dashboard, my mind racing. Whatever was out there, it wasn't finished with me, and I wasn't sure I was ready to find out what came next. Story 2. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the desolate truck stop. I had been driving for hours, trying to make up some lost time on my long journey, but fatigue was creeping in. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed how quiet everything was. The neon lights buzzed faintly, illuminating the weathered asphalt, and the distant hum of a highway was the only sound that broke the stillness. I parked near the building, stepping out of my car and stretching my legs. The night air was cool, with just a hint of dampness, but it felt good after being cooped up in the car for so long. The truck stop was small, with only a few dimly lit pumps and an old diner that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. As I made my way toward the diner's entrance, I spotted a lone truck in the far corner of the lot, its headlights still on. It seemed odd, but at this hour you couldn't really expect anything else. As I walked past the truck, I noticed something strange. The driver's side window was rolled up, but the tinted glass seemed to reflect the faint light in an unnatural way, almost like there was something or someone moving inside. I slowed my pace, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. The truck was old, the kind you'd see on the road for decades, its paint chipped and weathered. But what unsettled me wasn't the truck itself, it was the presence of the figure inside. Just beyond the windows, barely visible but enough to make my heart race. I took another step forward, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. Maybe it was just a trucker taking a break, like the dozens I had seen over the years. But then I saw the movement. It wasn't just the faint shadow I had caught earlier. This was something more deliberate. A figure was watching me, their eyes hidden behind the dark tint of the window, but I could feel their gaze on me as surely as if they had been standing right in front of me. The figure didn't blink, didn't make any attempt to hide. They simply watched, unmoving. I stopped in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't see much, but the shape of the figure was unmistakable. It wasn't the movement that terrified me, it was the stillness. The way they remained perfectly motionless, as though they were waiting for me to do something. It felt wrong, like I was being drawn into something I didn't understand. I stood there for a long moment, trying to shake off the feeling that something sinister was unfolding right in front of me. The silence was deafening, and I forced myself to look away. I tried to tell myself it was just a trucker resting, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the back of my mind. I moved slowly, my steps deliberate, trying to get to the diner without drawing attention to myself. But even as I tried to distract myself, my eyes kept darting back toward the truck. The figure was still there, their presence impossible to ignore. I felt like a puppet on a string, like I was being pulled in a direction I couldn't resist. When I reached the diner's door, I hesitated for a moment, glancing back over my shoulder. The figure was still there, still watching me. I didn't know if they had been following me, or if they had been there the whole time, but something about their gaze sent a chill straight to my bones. I quickly pushed the door open and stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly as I entered. The diner was nearly empty, the only sounds coming from the hum of a refrigerator and the low murmur of a lone trucker sitting at the counter. The waitress, a woman with a tired look in her eyes, glanced up at me as I walked in but didn't say anything. I chose a seat near the window, my back to the door, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Every time I looked out the window, I half expected to see the figure from the truck, standing just outside, waiting for me to leave. I ordered a cup of coffee and tried to calm my nerves, but it wasn't working. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the truck's headlights flick on, or the figure step out from behind the dark glass. But nothing happened. The truck remained parked in the corner, its engine silent. The diner's lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the checkered floor, and I tried to convince myself that it was all just my imagination running wild. But when my coffee arrived, the waitress handed it to me with a strange look in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at me made my skin prickle. "You okay, An?" she asked, her voice low, almost like she was afraid of saying too much. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, but I could feel her gaze linger on me for a moment longer than necessary. She must have seen something in my face that made her nervous. I sipped the coffee slowly, trying to calm myself, but my mind kept drifting back to the truck. It was almost as if I could still feel the weight of that shadowy gaze on me, even from inside the diner. The minutes dragged by, and I tried to distract myself with the old newspaper lying on the counter. But the unease only grew. I had the distinct feeling that the figure was still out there, still watching, waiting for me to do something, anything that would give them a reason to make their move. Finally, I stood up to leave, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for my jacket. I paid the waitress and walked toward the door, my eyes darting over to the truck one last time. The figure was still inside, but now, for the first time, they had moved. Their face was pressed against the window, just barely visible through the tint, and their eyes locked onto mine. The smile was gone now, replaced by a look that was almost predatory. It sent a jolt of fear through me. I didn't waste any more time. I practically ran back to my car, my footsteps echoing in the empty parking lot. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard the sound of a truck's engine starting, and my heart skipped a beat. The truck in the corner roared to life, its headlights flashing on and casting long shadows across the lot. I didn't wait to see where it was headed. I got in my car, slammed the door shut, and drove off into the night, trying to shake the feeling that something was following me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the truck had already disappeared. Still, The lingering sense that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous never left me. The shadowy figure had vanished, but their gaze stayed with me long after I had left the truck stop behind. Story 3. I had been driving for hours, the road stretching out in front of me like a never-ending ribbon, the monotony of the highway beginning to wear on me. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in a blanket of darkness. I was tired, really tired, and my eyes kept fluttering as I struggled to stay awake. Seeing a small, isolated rest area up ahead, I decided it was the perfect spot to pull over and catch a quick nap before continuing my journey. I parked my truck in one of the empty spots, the quiet hum of the engine slowly dying as I turned it off. The rest area was completely deserted, no other cars in sight. I figured I'd be safe here, away from the busy truck stops and the noise of other travelers. I reclined my seat, adjusted the mirrors, and closed my eyes, trying to get some much-needed rest. Within minutes, the rhythmic sound of my breathing was the only thing I could hear. When I woke up, I felt disoriented, the world around me still heavy with sleep. My eyes slowly opened, and I blinked a few times to clear the fog. It took a few moments for my mind to process what I was seeing, but once I did, my heart skipped a beat. Outside my truck, standing just a few feet away from the window, was a figure. The person was just standing there, motionless, staring directly at me. Their face was hidden in the shadows, but I could see their outline against the dim glow of the overhead lights. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I stared at the figure. I was alone. There was no reason for anyone to be out here at this hour, especially not in such an isolated place. I tried to shake the fogginess from my mind, but panic began to seep in. I honked the horn, hoping that would scare them off, but the figure didn't flinch, didn't even seem to acknowledge the sound. The only movement came from the gentle sway of the trees in the breeze and the distant hum of the highway, but everything else was unnervingly still. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my fingers trembling on the steering wheel as I watched the figure. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of prank? Was someone trying to mess with me? But deep down I knew it didn't feel right. The stillness of the night was too absolute, the isolation too complete. There was something about this situation that felt wrong on a gut level, like I was being watched, studied. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that I was just overreacting. Maybe it was just a hitchhiker, maybe they needed help. But the longer I stared, the more my gut told me that wasn't the case. Whoever this person was, they were standing there deliberately waiting, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to find out why. But then, after what felt like a full minute of staring into the darkness, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit here forever, feeling trapped. I reached for the door handle, taking a deep breath before I swung the door open. The night air hit me immediately, cool and crisp against my skin. I stepped out of the truck, my eyes scanning the area around me for any sign of movement. The figure was still there, standing exactly where they had been when I first saw them. It was impossible to make out any details about them, no features, no distinguishing marks, just a tall, dark silhouette in the night. I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. "Hey, what are you doing out here?" My words hung in the air, swallowed up by the silence. There was no response, no sound at all, except for the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The figure didn't even flinch. It was as if they hadn't heard me at all, or worse, were ignoring me entirely. I took a cautious step toward them, my body tense, ready to retreat if they made any sudden movements. But as I moved closer, something strange happened. The figure didn't move. They just stood there, unblinking, unmoving, almost as if they were waiting. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The sensation of being in the presence of someone who wasn't acting like a normal person. I stopped a few feet away, just close enough to try and get a better look at their face, but it was impossible. The shadows hid everything, and I could feel my breath quicken, the weight of the moment pressing on me. I should have just gotten back in the truck, locked the door, and driven away, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from them. Something about the stillness, the way they seemed so detached from everything, unsettled me to my core. I took another step forward, and that's when I noticed that the figure was starting to fade into the darkness. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they seemed to melt into the night, like a shadow dissipating into the air. I blinked, and in the span of a heartbeat they were gone. No movement, no sound, no trace of their presence. It was like they had never been there at all. My heart raced, and I stumbled backward, my mind unable to fully process what had just happened. I spun around to look at the empty rest area behind me. Nothing. There was no sign of anyone else, no footprints in the dirt, no broken branches. Just the same desolate stillness that had been there when I arrived. I felt the blood drain from my face, my body frozen in disbelief. Had I imagined it all? Was it a trick of the light, my mind playing tricks on me after hours of driving? But I knew better. I had seen that figure. I had heard the stillness, the weight of it pressing in on me. I wasn't crazy. Someone had been standing there, staring at me, and then they vanished without a trace. I didn't stick around to try to figure it out. I slammed the door of the truck shut, locked it, and started the engine with shaking hands. Without a second thought, I sped out of that rest area and onto the highway, eager to put miles between myself and whatever had just happened. Even now, the memory of that figure haunts me. I never saw them again, never found an explanation for what happened that night. But every time I pull off to a rest area, my eyes always flicker to the darkness, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. And I can't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, someone or something was waiting for me to look away. Story 4. The day had been long. The kind of work that left me aching in places I didn't even know existed. I had just finished unloading a shipment at the warehouse, and the sun was starting to dip below the horizon as I made my way back to my rig. The lot was mostly empty now, save for a few scattered trucks and forklifts. I didn't think much of it at first, the quiet settling over me like a blanket after the chaos of loading and unloading. But as I walked past the rows of parked vehicles, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the lot, near a dilapidated old warehouse, was a truck. It wasn't one I recognized, and it looked out of place among the heavy-duty rigs that usually filled the area. The truck was parked at an odd angle, its engine running. That wasn't entirely unusual. Sometimes trucks were left running to keep the AC or heat going, especially when drivers were resting. But what unsettled me was the driver. I couldn't see anyone behind the wheel, not even a silhouette. The truck sat still, idling, with no sign of movement. I paused for a moment, feeling a strange tug in my gut. The truck's engine hummed steadily, the sound of it vibrating through the air. I glanced around the lot, but it was as quiet as ever. I could feel something, though, an inexplicable sensation that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't just that the truck was sitting there, it was the sense that I was being watched. The kind of feeling that creeps up your spine when you know someone is staring at you, even though you can't see them. I shook the feeling off, chalking it up to exhaustion. Still, as I walked closer to my rig, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder at the truck every few steps. It was parked so far from the others, almost like it had been intentionally isolated. The odd angle of its parking didn't make much sense either. It was as if the driver had been trying to hide, or at least stay out of sight. I wasn't sure what exactly was bothering me, but there was something about it that just didn't sit right. When I reached the rear of my truck, I hesitated before turning to face the mysterious vehicle again. I could still feel that strange tug in my gut, and the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I needed to know what was going on. Maybe the driver had fallen asleep, or maybe they were just waiting for someone, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. So against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I walked slowly toward the truck, my boots crunching on the gravel, and as I got closer, I tried to peek inside. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that I couldn't make out the shape of the cab. I still couldn't see anyone inside. The door was slightly ajar, and I could just make out the outline of the steering wheel, the dashboard lit up by the dim glow of the truck's lights. There was no movement, no sign of life in the truck. It felt as though the whole scene was suspended in time. I took another cautious step forward, and that's when I realized something that made my heart stop. The cab was completely empty. There was no driver, no passenger, nothing. I stood there for a moment, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The truck had been running the whole time, the engine humming steadily, but there was no one behind the wheel. No one in the cab at all. My first instinct was to turn and run, but I was rooted to the spot, my body frozen by a combination of confusion and fear. I scanned the area again, looking for any sign of movement. Maybe the driver had stepped out for a minute. Maybe they were in the back of the truck or inside the warehouse. But there was nothing. No one around. The truck sat there in eerie silence, the engine still running, and I could feel the weight of the emptiness pressing down on me. My breath seemed to catch in my chest, and I suddenly became acutely aware of how isolated I was. I was alone in the lot, with no one else in sight. I stepped forward cautiously, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe the truck was abandoned. But if it was abandoned, why was the engine still running? Why hadn't anyone come to check on it? The thought that someone might have been hiding in the back of the truck, or in one of the nearby warehouses, sent a chill down my spine. I glanced over my shoulder again, but the lot was still eerily quiet. There were no other trucks moving, no signs of life. The only thing that was real in that moment was the truck, and the growing sense of unease it had stirred in me. I reached for my phone, thinking about calling the security company, but as I pulled it from my pocket, I froze. There was something else I hadn't noticed before, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I stood there, staring at the truck, I realized that the headlights had never flickered off. They were still on, casting long shadows across the ground, yet the truck had been sitting there for a while. No one had come near it, and it hadn't moved an inch. I wanted to call out, to ask if anyone was there, but the words stuck in my throat. It felt as though I was intruding on something I shouldn't be a part of. Maybe it was the loneliness of the situation, the eerie silence that surrounded me, but my gut was telling me to leave, to walk away and pretend I hadn't seen it. I could call someone from the safety of my rig, but something about the truck made me feel like it wasn't supposed to be disturbed. Something about it felt wrong, like it was part of a bigger picture I wasn't meant to understand. I took a few steps back, my mind racing, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I kept my eyes on the truck as I moved, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of the situation. But the more I looked at it, the more I felt the oppressive weight of something that wasn't quite right. I didn't know what it was, but the truck and its empty cab felt like a warning, a strange omen that I couldn't shake. I turned and walked back to my rig, keeping one last glance at the truck behind me. The engine was still running. Story 5. I'd always found something oddly comforting about late-night drives. The roads were empty, the world quiet, and the hum of the car's engine was almost like a lullaby. It was the perfect time to clear my head, especially after long shifts or stressful days. As the miles passed, I could feel the tension easing from my shoulders, the weight of the day slowly fading away. On this particular night, the air had a chill to it, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow over the empty streets. I wasn't in a hurry, just driving with no real destination in mind. My headlights swept over the familiar landmarks of the small towns I passed through. I was used to the sights: the old diner, the cracked road signs, the abandoned gas stations that always seemed to be on the outskirts of town, forgotten and left to fall apart. But tonight, one of those gas stations stood out to me in a way that made my skin crawl. As I approached the abandoned station, I noticed something unusual on the roof. There, standing perfectly still, was a man. He didn't move at all. He was just standing there, staring directly at me as I drove past. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively glanced away, my eyes glued to the road. It was strange, unsettling even, and for a moment I considered slowing down to see if he was okay. But something told me not to. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I pressed my foot harder on the gas, eager to put some distance between myself and whatever it was I had just seen. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to shake the image of the man out of my mind, but it lingered. Who would be on the roof of a deserted gas station in the middle of the night? And why didn't he move? It didn't make sense. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, that I was tired and overthinking things, but the image of that motionless figure stuck with me. I drove for another 20 minutes, trying to push the thought out of my mind, but it refused to go away. I felt like I was being watched, like someone was waiting for me to look back and confirm they were there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that there was something off about that man on the roof. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me, or something else in the shadows that shouldn't be there. But there was nothing. The road behind me was empty, just like the one in front of me. As I made my way back toward home, I found myself approaching that same gas station again. The streetlights were flickering, casting long shadows on the pavement, and the eerie silence of the night seemed to stretch on forever. I braced myself, expecting to see that same figure on the roof, staring at me again. But when I reached the spot, the roof was empty. There was no man, no movement, just the crumbling structure of the gas station against the dark sky. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or even more unsettled. I slowed down as I passed the station, my eyes scanning the roof once more, just in case. But the man was gone, completely vanished. I had seen him clearly before, standing there as I sped past, and now there was nothing. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had I imagined it? Had I seen someone else who was just there for a moment? A random stranger who happened to be on the roof for no reason at all? Or was something more sinister happening? I didn't want to believe that I had imagined it. The image was too vivid, too clear in my mind. The way he had just stood there, staring without moving, was something I couldn't easily shake off. My heart beat a little faster as I drove past the gas station, now certain that something wasn't right. But what could I do? It was just a man on a roof, and I had no real proof of anything strange. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it was just the quiet, the darkness, and the isolation of the late-night drive playing tricks on me. I reached home without incident, but even as I parked in my driveway, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. It felt like something was following me, something unseen that had been lurking in the corners of the night. I tried to brush it off as just a weird experience, a random moment of paranoia, but it stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. As I lay in bed that night, I kept thinking about that man. Why had he been there? And why was he gone when I passed the second time? The next few nights were the same. I continued my late-night drives, always passing that same gas station. But every time I looked up at the roof, there was never anyone there. The place seemed as desolate and abandoned as it had always been. Still, I couldn't help but feel that something had shifted, that something had been different that night. It wasn't just the sight of the man, it was the way he had stared at me, so intensely, as though he had been waiting for me to see him, to notice him. A week later, I drove by the gas station again, this time during the day. The place looked even worse in the daylight, the roof sagging and the windows boarded up. I stopped for a moment, wondering if the building had ever been anything more than a ghost of its former self. The air felt thick with history, and the emptiness of it seemed to swallow up the world around it. As I stood there, I couldn't help but glance up at the roof once more. For a brief moment, I thought I saw something movement, just at the edge of my vision. But when I looked closer, there was nothing. Just the desolate building, standing quietly in the sun, as if it had never held any secrets at all. Yet I couldn't escape the feeling that something had been there, something that didn't belong. I drove away slowly, the strange encounter still weighing on me, wondering if the man would ever return, or if I had merely glimpsed something that wasn't meant to be seen. Story 6. The road was quiet, the kind of silence that only comes with long stretches of asphalt in the middle of nowhere. I had been driving for hours, the hum of my tires on the highway almost lulling me to sleep. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten anything since the morning. So when I saw the small diner off the exit, I decided it would be a good place to stop and stretch my legs. The diner had a classic feel, neon lights buzzing above, a few trucks parked outside, and the smell of coffee and greasy food hanging in the air. Inside, there were a couple of truckers sitting at the counter, nursing mugs of coffee and chatting quietly. The place had that peaceful, worn-down charm of a spot that saw more lonely travelers than regulars. I slid into one of the empty booths, glad to be out of the car for a while. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes but a friendly smile, came over quickly to take my order. I was about to ask for a burger when I noticed one of the truckers across the room looking at me. At first, I thought it was nothing, just someone lost in thought or maybe checking out the newcomer. But his gaze lingered, and there was something unsettling about the way he stared at me. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. He didn't look like anything special, just your average trucker, rough around the edges, worn jeans, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. But there was an intensity in his eyes, like he was trying to read me, like he knew something I didn't. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the menu, but every time I glanced up, he was still staring. His eyes were fixed on me, almost too fixed, and it started to make my skin crawl. I tried to shake it off. It wasn't like I hadn't been stared at before. People get curious about travelers passing through small towns, but the way he was watching me felt different. It wasn't just curiosity. It was as if he was waiting for me to do something, to make a move. I could feel his gaze even when I wasn't looking directly at him, and it started to make me uneasy. I focused on the meal in front of me, hoping he would lose interest. As I ate, I couldn't help but feel his presence, like a shadow looming over me. I wasn't used to being the center of attention in places like this, and his stare made everything feel off balance. I glanced up once again, and this time he wasn't looking at me. He was staring down into his coffee mug, his brow furrowed as if he were deep in thought. I took a breath and looked around the diner, trying to calm my nerves. When I finished my meal and stood to pay, I felt a chill run down my spine. The trucker who had been staring at me was suddenly standing too, He wasn't at the counter anymore. He was now right behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of his body. I turned to face him, my heart starting to race as he stepped forward. His face was no longer neutral. There was a sense of urgency in his eyes now, a kind of quiet desperation. "You need to get out of here," he said, his voice low but insistent. His words sent a shiver through me, and I took a step back, confused. "What?" I asked, trying to process what he was saying. He glanced around the diner as if making sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "I don't stop in the next town," he warned, his voice trembling slightly. "Trust me. Just keep driving." I opened my mouth to ask why, but he held up a hand, cutting me off. "I can't explain it," he said quickly, his eyes darting nervously to the door. "But something's not right there. You don't want to be caught up in it. Just keep driving." There was something desperate in his voice, something that made my stomach churn. I could tell he wasn't joking. His words carried a weight that felt heavier than any normal advice. I wanted to ask him more. Why shouldn't I stop? What was going on in that town? But before I could say anything, he turned and walked toward the door, as if his warning had been given, and he had nothing else to say. The door opened with a creak, and he stepped outside into the night, leaving me standing there, unsure of what just happened. I looked over at the waitress, who was wiping down a table, but she didn't seem to notice the exchange. I stood there for a moment, frozen, my mind racing. What did he mean by that? Why would he tell me not to stop in the next town? I wasn't sure what to think. It could have just been some odd piece of advice, something a paranoid trucker might say to a stranger on the road. But the look in his eyes, the urgency in his voice, there was something about it that made me hesitate. I glanced at the clock. It was late, and I had been planning to stay on the road for a while longer before finding a place to crash. I stepped outside into the cool night air, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled into my bones. The diner's neon sign flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the empty parking lot. My car was parked in front, the headlights casting long shadows. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the door handle. Should I keep driving, like the trucker suggested? Or should I stop in the next town, just to see what was so strange about it? Against my better judgment, I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The thought of continuing to drive felt strange, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being warned for a reason. I couldn't explain it, but something told me to follow the trucker's advice. The road stretched out before me, empty and quiet, but the further I went, the more I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was making a mistake by ignoring his warning. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but they lingered, whispering to me in the dark. As I drove, I couldn't help but wonder what was waiting for me in that next town, and why had the trucker been so insistent that I keep going. Story 7. The fog was thick that night, rolling in like a heavy blanket as I drove through the winding mountain pass. The headlights barely pierced the mist ahead of me, and the world felt smaller, muffled by the haze. I had made this drive many times before, but tonight something felt different. The air was still and oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though I couldn't explain why. I had been driving for about an hour when the radio crackled, pulling me out of my uneasy thoughts. At first, I thought it was just the usual static you get when you're in a remote area with poor signal, so I fiddled with the dial, trying to find a station. But instead of the usual static or music, I heard something else, a soft, labored breathing. My fingers froze on the radio dial, and I leaned in closer, my heart skipping a beat. The breathing was deep, slow, almost as if someone was right there, on the other side of the airwaves, inhaling heavily, just waiting. I quickly turned the knob, hoping to break the connection, but the breathing didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, as if whoever was on the other end was leaning in right next to me, their breath echoing in the otherwise silent cabin of my car. My stomach churned and a cold sweat began to bead on my forehead. I slammed my hand down on the radio, desperately trying to turn it off, but it wouldn't budge. The sound persisted, as steady and haunting as ever. Panic surged through me. I had heard stories of strange occurrences on isolated mountain roads, but this felt different. This felt personal. The fog outside seemed to grow thicker, pressing in on all sides, and I felt as though I was trapped, unable to escape. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing just outside the window, but the only thing I saw was the swirling mist, its ghostly tendrils creeping closer to my car. I finally managed to turn the radio off, but the silence that followed was deafening. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the eerie stillness only made things worse. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows, blocking out everything. I could barely see the road in front of me, and all I could hear was the thumping of my own heartbeat in my ears. I had never felt so alone. Despite my best efforts to push through the unsettling feeling, my mind kept drifting back to the breathing on the radio. It was as if the person, if it was even a person, was still with me, just outside my reach. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and tried to focus on the road ahead, but every turn seemed to lead deeper into the fog. The road was narrow, winding and treacherous, with sheer drops on one side and towering trees on the other. I had to concentrate, or I risked losing control of the car. As I continued driving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I checked the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see headlights approaching from behind, but there was nothing. No one. Just the thick, suffocating fog that made the road feel endless. The further I went, the more I began to feel like I was descending into some sort of purgatory, a place where the ordinary rules of time and space didn't apply. And then, just as I rounded a tight bend, the radio came back on. It wasn't the static this time, though it was the breathing again. Only this time it was louder, more frantic, as though whoever it was on the other end was panicking. The sound seemed to reverberate through the car, shaking me to my core. I glanced at the radio in horror, trying to reach for the off button, but my hand couldn't seem to move fast enough. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet road, and the car came to a jarring stop. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared out into the thick fog, hoping to see some sign of life. Maybe a car, a person, anything that could explain the sound, but there was nothing. Just the thick, oppressive silence that seemed to press in on me from all directions. I rolled the window down slightly, hoping to hear anything, but all I could hear was the faint rustle of leaves and the distant howl of the wind. The breathing was gone. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I wanted to move, to get out of there, but a part of me was afraid to drive forward. I had no idea where I was anymore. The familiar road signs had long disappeared, swallowed up by the fog. My phone was dead, the screen blank when I tried to check it, leaving me with no way of knowing how far I had come, or how much further I had to go. After a few minutes of hesitation, I slowly began to inch the car forward, my eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror and side windows. The fog seemed to part just enough for me to see a few feet ahead, but it didn't help much. The road stretched on, empty and deserted. There were no signs of life, no other cars, no lights, no nothing. Then, as I came around another bend, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, just a silhouette, stood in the middle of the road. They were shrouded in the mist, too indistinct to make out any details, but their presence was unmistakable. I slammed on the brakes again, this time with all my strength, the car screeching to a halt just inches away from them. I stared in shock at the figure, but they didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, their form barely discernible against the backdrop of the fog. My heart raced as I slowly rolled down the window, half expecting the same heavy breathing to come through the air. But there was only the silence. The figure was still standing there, unmoving, a shadow in the fog. I took a deep breath, my mind racing with questions, trying to make sense of what was happening. I didn't know if the figure was real or just some manifestation of my growing fear, but I couldn't bring myself to move to get closer to find out. With a trembling hand, I put the car in reverse and backed up slowly. The figure remained motionless in the middle of the road, just watching me. I didn't dare take my eyes off them as I reversed, the fog swallowing me whole. When I finally turned the car around and sped off in the opposite direction, the radio remained eerily silent. But the feeling that someone was still out there, watching me, lingered long after the fog had begun to clear. Story 8. It was a quiet night. The kind that made the hours drag on slowly. I had just finished unloading a full load of goods at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and cold concrete, and the only sound was the hum of the warehouse lights overhead. The city was a few miles away, and this part of town was desolate at this hour, making it a peaceful place to get work done. Or at least, that's what I thought as I carried box after box from the back of my truck. As I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I glanced over my shoulder. Just beyond the edge of the loading dock, a truck sat parked, its headlights dimmed but still faintly glowing in the night. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, warehouses are often used by various people at all hours, and it was possible someone else was working late too. But then I noticed the driver. He was sitting in the cab staring straight at me. His face was obscured by the darkness inside the truck, but his eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, focusing on getting the job done, but I couldn't help stealing glances every so often. The longer I worked, the more his presence started to unsettle me. There was something about the way he just sat there, motionless, watching my every move. I figured it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe the guy was waiting for something, maybe he was just tired or bored. But the feeling of being watched didn't subside. I couldn't shake the sense that the truck and its driver were waiting for something, or perhaps for me to do something. Still, I pushed the unease to the back of my mind and focused on my work, determined to finish quickly and leave. As I began loading the last few boxes into the warehouse, I glanced over at the truck once again. This time the driver was gone. The truck was empty, and there was no sign of the person who had been watching me so intently just moments before. It struck me as odd. Had he left so suddenly, or had I just not noticed when he got out? I stood there for a moment, squinting into the darkness, trying to make sense of it. But I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The night was still, the only sounds being the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I finished unloading the rest of the goods, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. It wasn't uncommon for strange things to happen at night, especially in quiet places like this. But just as I was about to climb into my truck and head home, I saw something unusual. A piece of paper fluttered in the wind, caught under the windshield wiper of my truck. It was too odd to ignore, and my curiosity got the better of me. I walked over and reached for the note. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled the paper free from the wiper. It was a plain, folded sheet of paper, nothing fancy. But as I unfolded it, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Written in a hurried, almost messy handwriting, the note simply read, "You're not alone." The words were sharp, as if the person who wrote them had something urgent to convey. I stood there in the empty lot, the note hanging in my hands like a warning I wasn't ready to face. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up again, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. The note was too specific, too personal, and I had no idea who could have left it. I glanced around quickly, scanning the empty lot, but the truck was nowhere to be seen. It was just me in the darkness now. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched once more, but when I looked around, there was no one in sight. I quickly folded the note and stuffed it into my pocket, my mind racing. Who had written it? And what did it mean? The phrase echoed in my head like a haunting refrain. You're not alone. I had been alone just moments ago, unloading boxes, unaware of anyone else being nearby. But now, in the silence of the lot, it felt as if something was lurking just beyond my reach. I got into my truck and started the engine, trying to push the fear aside. But the unease didn't fade. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as I backed out of the parking spot and made my way down the dimly lit road. The streets were empty, and the night felt like it was closing in around me. As I drove away from the warehouse, I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. The further I drove, the more I convinced myself that it was all in my head. Maybe I was overreacting, imagining things where there was nothing. But as I passed a few streetlights, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something in the mirror, a shadow moving just beyond the glow of the lights. It was too quick to be sure, but I couldn't shake the thought that it was the same truck following me now, just out of sight. I turned onto a side street, trying to lose whatever suspicion was gnawing at me. But even as I did, I couldn't escape the feeling of being hunted. Every turn I made felt like a loop. Every straight stretch of road seemed to stretch on longer than it should. My eyes kept flicking back to the rearview mirror, scanning for any signs of the truck, but I never saw it. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were clammy, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I parked in my usual spot and sat there for a moment, staring out at the darkened street. There was no sign of anyone or anything unusual, but the words on that note, the memory of the driver's gaze, and the creeping suspicion that I wasn't alone, those things stayed with me long after the night had ended. As I locked my truck and walked toward my apartment door, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was going on, whatever had happened that night, wasn't over. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Story 9. It was around midnight when I first heard the buzzing. My CB radio, which I usually only used for background noise while I worked late, suddenly crackled to life, the static louder than I'd ever heard. At first I thought maybe it was just some interference, the usual random static that sometimes plagued the airwaves. But then the buzzing faded, and a distorted voice emerged from the noise, sending a chill down my spine. Stay off the back roads. The voice was gravelly, almost muffled, as if the person was speaking through layers of thick fabric. The words came out slowly, deliberately, like a warning that should have been taken seriously. I sat frozen, my hand hovering over the radio's knob, unsure whether I should respond or just turn it off. But the voice didn't repeat itself, and the static returned as quickly as it had gone, filling the room with an unsettling hum. I shook my head, dismissing the whole thing as a prank. It wasn't the first time I'd heard strange things on the CB, people messing around, trying to scare someone in the middle of the night. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled in my chest. The message felt too specific, too purposeful for it to just be a random joke. But I didn't dwell on it for long. I turned the radio off and went to bed, trying to forget about it. The next morning, the unease lingered as I brewed my coffee, still half dazed from the night before. I sat down in front of the TV, absent-mindedly flipping through the channels as I waited for the day to begin. That's when the news report caught my attention. The anchor's voice was calm, but the story she was telling was anything but. She was describing a trucker, a man who had been found dead along the very same back road I had been hearing about on the CB. The report mentioned how his truck had been discovered late the night before, parked off the road, with no sign of a struggle. The authorities had no explanation for what happened to him. They simply knew that he was dead, alone, on a stretch of road known for being isolated and desolate. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips, as the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The back road, the one the voice on the CB had warned me about. The one I had heard about only hours earlier. I felt my throat go dry. The coincidence seemed too strange to be just that, a coincidence. My mind raced as I replayed the words in my head. The voice on the CB repeating in a loop, "Stay off the back roads." How could someone have known? How could they have warned me in such a cryptic way? Unless they had known something I didn't. I tried to push the thought out of my head. It was just a freak occurrence, I told myself. A trucker's death had nothing to do with me. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. There was a pattern here, a connection I couldn't ignore. I kept seeing the face of the trucker in my mind, his image on the news, and the road he died on. The back roads were always quiet, lonely places perfect for something bad to happen and go unnoticed. I had the voice on the CB been warning me about something I couldn't see, about a danger I didn't understand. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to know more. I had to find out what happened to the trucker, and whether it had anything to do with the strange warning I had received. I called the local police station, asking if they had more information, but they wouldn't tell me much. The officer on the other end was polite but curt, simply saying that the investigation was ongoing and that they had no leads to follow. He told me that the back roads were often used by truckers as shortcuts, and it wasn't unusual for them to pull off for a rest. It wasn't much, but it gave me the tiniest sliver of information to work with. I decided to drive out to the back road myself. Something inside me urged me to go, as if the answer to the mystery was out there waiting for me. It felt crazy, but I needed closure. If only to quiet the nagging feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. When I arrived at the back road, it was just as desolate and eerie as I had imagined. The road stretched out before me, barely lit by the weak glow of the streetlights scattered far apart. The trees along the sides were thick, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. There was no sign of life, no cars, no people, just the empty road, stretching endlessly in both directions. I drove slowly, my eyes scanning the area for any clue, any sign that might explain the trucker's death. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the whole place felt suffocating. My palms were clammy on the steering wheel, my senses on high alert. It was as though the road itself was trying to push me away, warning me to turn back, just like the voice on the CB had done. As I drove further down the road, I came across a small, overgrown patch where I could tell the trucker's vehicle had likely been found. There was nothing here now but a few tire marks, barely visible in the grass. But something about the area felt wrong, like a presence I couldn't see was hovering just out of view. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone. I had almost convinced myself to leave when I heard it, soft at first, but unmistakable. The same static hum that had filled my CB radio. I quickly grabbed the radio, my heart pounding. The static built, and then, just as before, the distorted voice broke through. "Stay off the back roads," it said again, this time clearer, more urgent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was coming through the radio, but it wasn't a prank. It wasn't random. It was a warning that someone or something was trying to stop me from being there. I couldn't explain it, but I knew deep down that I had to get out of there. I didn't need to hear the voice again. I didn't need to see anything more. With my hands shaking, I turned the car around and sped back toward the main road, the words echoing in my mind. Stay off the back roads. The next day, I learned that another trucker had gone missing on the same stretch of road. The authorities were investigating, but no one could explain the strange deaths, nor the whispers of a warning on the airwaves. I never went back to that road again. And every time I hear static on my CB, I still wonder who or what was trying to warn me. Story 10. I've been driving for over 10 years, and I've always considered myself a confident driver. I've navigated busy highways, winding mountain roads, and late-night drives without much trouble. But one night, a simple wrong turn changed everything. That night, I found myself on an unfamiliar road, and what started as a minor inconvenience quickly became the most terrifying experience of my life. The road was poorly lit, with dense trees lining both sides. The narrow pavement twisted and turned, making it hard to see what was ahead. I had been trying to get back to the main highway after missing an exit, but my GPS kept losing signal. Frustrated, I decided to keep driving, hoping the road would eventually lead me somewhere familiar. It was then that I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I thought nothing of it. It wasn't unusual for another car to be on the road, even this late at night. But as the car got closer, I realized it wasn't just following me, it was tailgating me. The headlights were blinding in my rearview mirror, and I felt my pulse quicken. I tried to stay calm and focus on the road. Maybe the driver was in a hurry or impatient. I signaled and moved slightly to the side, hoping they would pass me. Instead, the car stayed right behind me, matching my every move. That's when the flashing began. The driver started turning their high beams on and off, the bursts of light illuminating my car's interior. Unease crept into my chest as I tried to figure out what to do. I checked my phone again, but there was still no signal. The road stretched endlessly ahead, with no signs of civilization in sight. I decided to speed up, thinking I could create some distance between us. The engine roared as I pressed down on the accelerator, but the car behind me matched my speed effortlessly. The flashing headlights became more aggressive, almost rhythmic, like a warning. I glanced in the rearview mirror and could just make out the silhouette of the driver. My mind raced with possibilities. Were they trying to warn me about something wrong with my car? Or was this something far more sinister? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. The road grew darker, the trees on either side forming a tunnel that seemed closing around me. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my knuckles white. I thought about pulling over, but the idea of stopping on this desolate road with that car behind me sent chills down my spine. I couldn't take the risk. As I approached a sharp curve, I took it faster than I should have, hoping to gain some ground. My tires screeched against the pavement, and for a moment, I thought I might lose control. The car behind me followed without hesitation, its headlights unwavering. My heart pounded as I realized I couldn't shake them. Up ahead, I spotted a narrow dirt road branching off to the right. It was barely visible in the darkness, but it was my only chance. Without thinking, I turned sharply onto it, my car bouncing as it hit the uneven surface. I killed my headlights and drove as far as I could before pulling off to the side and cutting the engine. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I sat in silence, hoping I hadn't been seen. The seconds felt like hours as I waited, straining to hear any sound. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, my ears tuned to every creak and rustle outside. Then I heard the low hum of an engine. The car had followed me onto the dirt road. Its headlights swept across the trees, searching, probing. I ducked down, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The car slowed, its tires crunching over gravel. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The headlights moved closer, then stopped just ahead of where I had parked. For a moment I thought the driver might get out. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the car slowly turned around and drove back the way it had come. I stayed frozen in place, too scared to move. Even after the sound of the engine faded, I waited, afraid they might return. Finally, I worked up the courage to start my car again. I kept my headlights off and drove slowly back to the main road, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't dare check my rearview mirror until I was certain I was alone. When I eventually found my way back to a more familiar area, I pulled into the first gas station I saw. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I felt a small measure of safety. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to calm down. My mind replayed every moment, every decision, wondering if I had done the right thing. Who was that driver? What did they want? I knew I would never get the answers, but the questions lingered. That night changed the way I drive. I've always been cautious, but now I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings. I avoid unfamiliar roads at night whenever possible and make sure my phone is fully charged before any trip. The memory of those flashing headlights and the relentless pursuit stays with me, a reminder of how quickly things can take a terrifying turn. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't taken that dirt road. The thought sends shivers down my spine. All I know is that I was lucky to get away, and I'll never forget the night I took that wrong turn. Story 11. I was about 30 miles outside of a small town, driving down a desolate stretch of road. The sun had long set, and the only light came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was empty, with no signs of other vehicles or buildings for miles. The quiet was both calming and unsettling, but I was focused on getting to my destination. Out of nowhere, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. A truck came up fast behind me, closing the gap between us in seconds. At first, I thought it was just another late-night traveler, but as it drew closer, I realized something was off. The truck was tailgating me so closely that I could barely see its front bumper. I tapped the brakes lightly to signal that they were too close, but the truck didn't back off. Instead, it stayed right on my bumper, its bright headlights flooding my car's interior. My heart started to race as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I sped up, hoping to create some distance, but the truck matched my speed, refusing to fall back. I decided to pull over to let it pass, thinking the driver might be impatient or in a hurry. I slowed down and moved to the side of the road, my tires crunching against the gravel shoulder. But the truck didn't pass. It stopped too, just a few feet behind me, its engine idling loudly in the still night. A chill ran down my spine as I sat there, unsure of what to do next. The truck's headlights glared into my rearview mirror, making it impossible to see the driver. My instincts screamed at me to get out of there, so I eased back onto the road and picked up speed. To my dismay, the truck followed, maintaining the same unnervingly close distance. I tried everything to lose it. I sped up, slowed down, and even took a few sharp turns down side roads. But no matter what I did, the truck stayed with me, its presence like a predator stalking its prey. My pulse pounded in my ears as I began to realize this wasn't just some coincidence. Whoever was driving the truck was intentionally following me. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, flanked by dense woods on either side. There were no gas stations, no houses, and no other cars in sight. I felt completely isolated, trapped in a game I didn't understand. My phone had no signal, leaving me with no way to call for help. Panic began to creep in as I scanned the road for any sign of an escape. I noticed a faint glow of lights in the distance, and relief washed over me. It looked like a rest stop or a small gas station, and I decided to head straight for it. If I could get to a populated area, maybe the truck would back off. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator as I raced toward the lights. As I neared the rest stop, the truck suddenly swerved into the opposite lane and accelerated past me. My heart leaped as I watched it speed ahead, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. For a moment, I felt a wave of relief, thinking the ordeal was over. But then, as I approached the rest stop, I saw the truck parked on the side of the road, its engine still running. My hands trembled as I drove past it, trying not to look over. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a figure in the driver's seat, but the darkness made it hard to tell. I debated stopping at the rest stop, but something about the truck being there felt wrong. I kept driving, my stomach in knots as I left the lights behind and plunged back into the night. The truck didn't follow me this time, but the unease lingered. Every few minutes I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see those headlights again. The road grew narrower and more winding, the woods on either side seeming to close in. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, even though the truck was nowhere in sight. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the faint glow of the small town up ahead. The sight of streetlights and buildings brought a sense of safety I hadn't felt in miles. I drove straight to the nearest gas station and parked under the bright lights, my hands still shaking as I turned off the engine. Inside the gas station, I told the attendant what had happened, hoping they might have some insight. The man behind the counter listened intently, his expression growing grim. "You're not the first person to say something like that," he said quietly. "There've been reports of a truck harassing drivers on that stretch of road. No one knows who's driving it, but it always disappears before the police can catch it." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I thanked him and stepped outside, feeling the cool night air against my skin. My car sat under the fluorescent lights, looking small and vulnerable. I hesitated for a moment before getting back inside, double-checking that the doors were locked. The drive to my final destination was uneventful, but the tension in my chest didn't ease until I pulled into the driveway. Even then, I found myself looking over my shoulder as I unloaded my bags. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying the events over and over. The truck, the headlights, the feeling of being hunted, it all felt like a bad dream. In the days that followed, I avoided that stretch of road, taking longer routes to bypass it altogether. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was driving the truck hadn't been doing it for fun. They had a purpose, one I was grateful not to have discovered. Even now, the memory of those headlights in my rearview mirror sends a chill through me. Story 12. I pulled into the rest stop to take a quick break. The drive had been long and uneventful, the kind that lulls you into a false sense of security. The lot was nearly empty, just a couple of cars parked near the entrance and a lone truck far off in the shadows. Its lights were off and the cab looked dark, but something about its presence unsettled me. I parked my truck close to the building, wanting to stay in the glow of the overhead lights. The restroom building stood stark and silent, its fluorescent bulbs casting an unnatural glare on the pavement. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine from the surrounding woods. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots, and headed toward the restrooms, feeling the weight of the stillness around me. As I passed the truck, I caught myself glancing at it. It was an older model, with rust creeping along its edges and a cracked windshield. I couldn't see inside the cab, but the feeling that someone might be watching me crept in. I quickened my pace, brushing off the unease as nothing more than the result of exhaustion. The restroom was as expected, dimly lit and eerily quiet. The sound of the faucet echoed as I washed my hands, and I couldn't shake the sensation of being alone yet observed. I dried my hands quickly, the thin paper towels crumpling in my grip, and headed back outside. The parking lot was just as I'd left it, but the truck now seemed even darker, as if it absorbed the surrounding light. As I walked past the truck again, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was a faint sound, almost imperceptible at first, like the crunch of gravel underfoot. My breath caught in my throat as the sound repeated, deliberate and measured. Footsteps. They were behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My heart pounded as I quickened my pace, each step feeling heavier than the last. The gravel beneath my boots seemed louder now, the sound of my own movements blending with the faint echo of someone else's. The distance to my truck felt impossibly far, and I resisted the urge to break into a run. Running might provoke someone to act. I reached my truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence was almost worse. I forced myself to glance back, but the lot was empty. The truck in the shadows sat still, its presence menacing but unmoving. I climbed into my cab and locked the doors, my breathing ragged as I started the engine. The roar of the engine broke the oppressive silence, but I didn't feel any safer. I checked my mirrors, scanning the lot for any sign of movement. Nothing. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered, a weight pressing against my chest. I shifted into drive and pulled out, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror as I left the rest stop behind. The highway stretched out before me, the dark ribbon of asphalt lit only by my headlights. The unease refused to fade, my mind replaying the sound of those footsteps over and over. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been my imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by fatigue. But deep down, I knew better. After driving for a few miles, I spotted another rest stop up ahead. I debated pulling over again, hoping the presence of more people might ease my nerves. As I approached, I noticed it was similarly deserted, save for a single car parked near the entrance. I decided against stopping, the memory of the footsteps too fresh. The night stretched on, the miles blurring together as I drove. I couldn't shake the sense of being followed, though the road behind me remained empty. Each shadow cast by the trees along the highway seemed to shift and writhe, playing tricks on my tired eyes. I gripped the wheel tighter, determined to put as much distance as possible between myself and that rest stop. Hours later, I finally reached a well-lit truck stop bustling with activity. The bright lights and the presence of other travelers brought a wave of relief. I parked and sat in my truck for a moment, letting the tension drain from my body. The safety of the crowd was a comfort, but the memory of that night lingered, a nagging reminder of how quickly things could feel wrong. I stepped out and stretched. The noise of the truck stop a stark contrast to the oppressive silence I had left behind. People moved about, talking and laughing, their voices blending with the hum of engines. For the first time that night, I felt a sense of normalcy returning. Yet, even in the safety of the crowd, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure lurking in the shadows. The experience stayed with me long after that night. Every time I passed a rest stop on a late-night drive, I felt a flicker of unease. The sound of footsteps, the dark truck in the shadows, and the overwhelming sense of being watched became etched in my memory. It was a reminder that even the most ordinary places could hold something unsettling just beneath the surface. To this day, I avoid rest stops late at night. The thought of stepping out into the quiet, with only the faint hue of fluorescent lights and the vast emptiness around me, is enough to send a chill down my spine. I stick to truck stops in well-lit areas, places where the presence of others feels like a shield against the unknown. But every now and then, when the road is dark and silent, I'll catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something I can't explain. Story 13. After a long day on the road, I decided to pull off at a quiet truck stop. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving a hazy glow over the landscape. There was only one other truck parked there, its engine idling softly in the stillness. The driver sat in his rig, a silhouette behind the wheel, motionless except for the faint glow of a cigarette in his hand. I parked a few spaces away and stepped out, stretching my stiff legs. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of diesel and dry grass. The truck stop was simple, just a small building with a flickering neon sign advertising coffee and snacks. The driver in the other truck didn't acknowledge me, his gaze fixed somewhere distant as I walked past his rig. Inside, the truck stop was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from an old radio playing soft country music. The cashier was an older man who barely glanced up from his newspaper. I grabbed a cup of coffee from the self-serve machine, the bitter aroma filling the small space. The walls were lined with faded posters and shelves of road maps that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. When I stepped back outside, I immediately noticed something was off. The other truck was gone. It had been parked right there, its engine running when I went inside. Now all that remained was an empty parking space. Confused, I glanced around the lot, expecting to see taillights disappearing into the distance, but there was nothing. Then I saw them. A pair of boots sat on the ground where the truck had been. They were worn, with scuffed leather and cracked soles positioned neatly as if someone had stepped out of them and vanished. My heart began to race as I approached them, the quiet of the night suddenly feeling oppressive. There was no sign of the driver anywhere. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The boots looked old, the kind you'd expect a seasoned trucker to wear. They were pointed toward the building, as if the man had been walking toward the truck stop but never made it inside. The silence around me seemed heavier now, the distant hum of the highway barely audible. My eyes scanned the area, searching for any movement. The truck stop's lights cast long shadows across the lot, and every flicker made me jump. I called out, my voice shaky, but there was no response. It felt like the world had swallowed the driver whole, leaving behind only his boots as a bizarre clue. I went back inside, hoping the cashier might have seen something. He looked up as I approached the counter, his expression as unreadable as before. I asked if he'd noticed the truck leaving or the driver coming in. He frowned, setting down his newspaper, and said he hadn't seen anyone but me all evening. His answer sent a chill down my spine. Determined to figure out what was going on, I stepped back outside and walked around the lot. The ground was hard-packed dirt, and I couldn't see any fresh footprints. It was as if the driver had disappeared without a trace. The boots remained exactly where they had been, untouched and oddly menacing in their stillness. The unease I felt grew stronger as the minutes ticked by. I thought about leaving, but curiosity kept me rooted in place. I decided to take a closer look at the boots, crouching down to examine them. There was nothing unusual about them at first glance, but as I reached out to touch one, I noticed something strange. The ground beneath them was damp, even though the rest of the lot was dry. It looked almost like sweat, glistening faintly in the dim light. The air seemed to grow colder as I stood there, and a sudden gust of wind whipped through the lot. The boots tipped over, landing on their sides with a soft thud. The sound startled me, and I stepped back, my heart pounding. It felt like the night was watching me, waiting for something to happen. I decided I'd had enough. Grabbing my coffee from the roof of my car, I climbed in and locked the doors. As I started the engine, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My headlights illuminated the boots one last time before I backed out of the lot. They looked smaller somehow, almost insignificant, but I couldn't forget them. Driving back onto the highway, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the missing truck or its driver following me. The road stretched on, dark and empty, but the unease stayed with me. I couldn't explain what I'd seen or why it felt so wrong. All I knew was that something about that truck stop wasn't right. Hours later, I pulled into a motel, still rattled by the experience. As I checked in, the receptionist commented on how pale I looked, asking if I was feeling okay. I nodded, not wanting to explain what had happened. That night I barely slept, my mind replaying the scene over and over. In the days that followed, I tried to forget about it, but the image of those boots stayed with me. I even considered going back to the truck stop to see if they were still there, but something told me it was better to leave it alone. The mystery of the missing driver and his boots would remain unsolved, a strange memory that haunted the edges of my thoughts. Even now, when I stop at a quiet truck stop late at night, I find myself looking for boots on the ground. I'll glance at the other drivers, wondering if they're real or if they too might vanish into the night. The road is full of mysteries, and some are better left unexplored. Story 14. The route through the small town had always been uneventful. It was the kind of place that felt suspended in time, with cracked sidewalks, peeling paint on houses, and a single blinking traffic light. I rarely saw anyone out, especially at night, which made it the perfect shortcut. But tonight, something felt off as I approached the outskirts. The first thing I noticed was the glow. Every single house was illuminated, their lights casting eerie yellow halos onto the empty streets. It was strange enough to see so many lights on past midnight, but as I drove deeper into town, a creeping unease began to settle in. The lights weren't the only thing that felt wrong. I slowed down, glancing at the rows of houses. Curtains shifted as I passed, and faint movements caught my eye. It wasn't just the lights, there were people inside, standing at their windows, watching. Their silhouettes were faint, but their eyes seemed to gleam in the dim light. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe there'd been a town meeting or a local event that ran late. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the eyes weren't just curious. They were unblinking, tracking me with a precision that made my stomach knot. My car crawled forward, the engine's hum the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Normally I would have had the radio on, but tonight I hadn't bothered. Now I regretted it. The quiet made the town feel alive, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. At one house, I thought I saw someone step closer to the window. Their face was pale, almost ghostly, as they pressed it against the glass. I couldn't make out their features, but their presence felt suffocating. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I forced myself to look away. The road curved sharply near the center of town, leading past an old church and a row of abandoned shops. Even here, the lights were blazing. The church's stained glass windows glowed like fiery eyes, and the storefronts were alive with fluorescent light. Yet no one was outside. The further I drove, the more surreal it became. It felt like the town itself was aware of me, like every light and every set of eyes was a warning. I thought about turning around, but the idea of driving past those houses again made my skin crawl. My foot pressed harder on the gas. I didn't want to speed, but I needed to get out of there. The end of town wasn't far now, just a few more blocks. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to ignore the movement in my peripheral vision. As I neared the last stretch, something caught my attention. A single house, larger than the rest, stood at the edge of the town. Unlike the others, its windows were dark, its porch light flickering weakly. For a moment I felt relief finally, something normal. But as I passed, the front door creaked open. I didn't see who or what opened it, but the sound was unmistakable. My pulse quickened, and I pressed harder on the accelerator. The urge to get away was overwhelming now. The lights in my rearview mirror seemed to follow me, growing brighter as I sped toward the highway. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the adrenaline messing with my head. Still, I didn't look back for long. When I finally reached the main road, I exhaled shakily. The oppressive feeling lifted slightly, but my mind raced with questions. What had I just seen? Why was the town so alive tonight? I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was nearly 1 a.m., but the events of the last 10 minutes made it feel much later. I couldn't shake the image of those eyes, the way they had followed me, unblinking and cold. The rest of the drive home was uneventful, but the tension in my chest didn't ease. Even when I pulled into my driveway, the thought of those glowing windows lingered. I locked my car, double-checked the door, and turned on every light in my house. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, made me sit up and listen. I kept imagining those eyes, watching, waiting. By morning, I told myself it had been nothing, just a strange night in a strange town. But the next time I took that route, I noticed something different. The town was completely dark. No lights, no signs of life. It was as if it had been abandoned overnight. The eerie glow and the watching eyes were gone, leaving behind an unsettling silence. I didn't stop to investigate. Whatever had happened there, I wanted no part of it. From then on, I chose a different route, even if it added time to my drive. Some places are better left undisturbed. Even now, I can't explain what I saw that night. I've told myself it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, but deep down I know the truth. That town wasn't normal, and I was lucky to get out. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the town is still there. If I were to take that road again, would the lights be back on? Would the eyes be waiting? The thought alone is enough to keep me far, far away. Story 15. It was one of those long-haul nights where the road seemed endless and the darkness pressed in like a weight. The hum of the engine and the faint crackle of the CB radio were my only companions as I navigated the lonely highway. When the fuel gauge dipped lower than I'd planned, I spotted a dimly lit gas station up ahead and decided to pull in. The place looked deserted, the kind of station that had seen better days and probably wouldn't see many more. I stepped out of the cab, the cool night air brushing against my skin as I grabbed the nozzle to fill up. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint squeak of the gas pump and the distant hum of insects. The lights overhead flickered, casting uneven shadows across the gravel lot. That was when I saw him, a man trudging toward me from the far side of the station. He moved slowly, his boots dragging against the ground, creating a crunching sound that seemed louder than it should have been. His figure was tall and broad, but his face was obscured by the shadow of his hat. I felt the weight of his stare even before I looked directly at him. Something about his presence felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I nodded at him out of courtesy, hoping for some acknowledgement, but he didn't respond. His gaze never left me, even as he passed by, his movements deliberate and unhurried. I told myself he was probably just another trucker, someone who'd seen too many miles and had too few words left to share. But the unease lingered as I watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the pumps. Once the tank was full, I replaced the nozzle and glanced around, my eyes drawn to the shadows where the man had vanished. The night seemed quieter now, as if it were holding its breath. I shook off the feeling, chalking it up to the exhaustion that came with long hours on the road. Climbing back into the cab, I locked the doors out of habit and started the engine. As I pulled out of the station, the headlights swept across the lot, briefly illuminating the area. There was no sign of the man. The gravel where he had walked was undisturbed, as if he had never been there. A chill ran down my spine, but I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. The highway stretched out like a ribbon of black, and I was eager to put distance between me and the station. Miles passed, but the feeling of being watched clung to me. The rear-view mirrors reflected only darkness, yet I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. The CB radio crackled to life, breaking the silence with static and fragmented voices. I reached for the dial to adjust the frequency, but the voices were too faint to make out. As the night wore on, I noticed headlights in the distance behind me. They were faint at first, but they grew brighter with each passing minute. I kept my eyes on the road, trying not to let my imagination get the better of me. But when the lights drew close enough, I realized it was a pair of high beams, blinding and unrelenting. The vehicle behind me wasn't passing, nor was it falling back. It stayed just close enough to make its presence known, its lights flooding my mirrors and casting harsh glares inside the cab. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowed down, hoping they would pass, but they matched my speed, staying right behind me. The unease from earlier returned, sharper now, like a blade pressing against my thoughts. I considered pulling over, but the thought of stopping on an empty stretch of highway with no one around made my stomach churn. Instead, I pressed on, my eyes flicking between the road and the mirrors, trying to figure out what this driver wanted. Eventually, the high beams disappeared, leaving me in the quiet darkness once more. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When I glanced at the passenger side mirror, I thought I saw a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but the seat beside me was empty. The road ahead blurred as exhaustion and paranoia set in. I needed to rest, but every rest stop I passed felt too isolated, too vulnerable. My thoughts kept circling back to the man at the gas station, the way he had stared without speaking, and the way he had disappeared. I told myself it was all in my head, but the feeling of unease refused to fade. After what felt like hours, I spotted a brightly lit truck stop in the distance. It was bustling with activity, a stark contrast to the desolation I had felt all night. I pulled in and parked among the rows of rigs, the noise and lights a welcome reprieve from the oppressive silence of the highway. Inside the diner, I ordered a coffee and tried to shake off the lingering tension. The chatter of other drivers and the clatter of dishes grounded me, reminding me that I wasn't alone. But when I glanced toward the window, my heart stopped. There he was, the man from the gas station, standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the lights. He was watching me, his silhouette motionless against the darkness. I turned back toward the counter, gripping my mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I looked again, he was gone. I didn't stay long after that. The thought of returning to the road made my stomach churn, but staying put felt worse. As I climbed back into the cab, I checked every lock and scanned the lot one last time. The night seemed heavier now, the air thick with a tension I couldn't explain. I drove through the rest of the night, my eyes darting between the road and the mirrors, expecting to see those high beams or that shadowy figure at any moment. By the time dawn broke, the tension had eased, but the memory of that night stayed with me. Even now, I can't help but wonder who or what I encountered on that lonely stretch of highway. Story 16. I had been driving for hours along a desolate stretch of highway, the kind that seems to stretch endlessly under a gray sky. The road was flanked by dense trees on either side, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out much of the fading light. The monotony of the drive was broken only by the occasional chirp of my car's tires as they rolled over patches of loose gravel. I had barely seen another vehicle in the past hour, and the silence was almost oppressive. As I rounded a gentle curve, I saw a figure up ahead on the shoulder of the road. It was a man standing stiffly, his arm raised as he waved me down. He was wearing a dark jacket, and his face was partially obscured by the shadow of the trees. Something about his posture struck me as odd, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I slowed the car and pulled over a few yards ahead of him, my curiosity outweighing the slight unease I felt. I rolled down the window and called out to him, asking if he needed help. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood there for a moment longer, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The thought crossed my mind that perhaps he was injured or in shock, so I decided to step out of the car and approach him. As soon as I opened the door and set foot on the asphalt, he turned abruptly and disappeared into the trees. For a moment I stood there, frozen in place. It was as though he had evaporated into the forest. The underbrush was thick, and the ground sloped steeply downward just beyond the tree line. It didn't seem possible that he could have moved so quickly. I called out again, my voice louder this time, but there was no reply. Only the rustling of leaves answered me, stirred by a faint breeze that seemed colder than it had been moments before. I hesitated, debating whether to follow him into the woods. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't shake the thought that he might be in trouble. Taking a deep breath, I stepped closer to the trees, peering into the dim undergrowth. The light was fading fast, and the shadows seemed to deepen with every passing second. My heart pounded as I called out once more, my voice sounding small and uncertain against the vast stillness. There was no sign of him. The forest seemed to swallow up my words, and an eerie silence settled around me. The rational part of my mind told me to leave, to get back in my car and drive away, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. I scanned the ground for footprints or any sign that someone had been there, but the forest floor was covered in a thick layer of leaves that betrayed no trace. I decided to venture a few steps into the woods, just far enough to satisfy my conscience. The air felt heavier here, laden with the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. Every crackle of a twig under my foot sounded unnaturally loud, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes darted around, searching for any movement among the trees, but all I saw were shadows. After a few minutes, I stopped and stood still, straining my ears for any sound that might indicate the man's presence. A faint rustling caught my attention, and I turned toward it, my heart leaping into my throat. But it was only a squirrel darting up the trunk of a tree, its small body barely visible in the dim light. I let out a shaky breath, feeling both relieved and frustrated. Whoever the man was, he was long gone. As I made my way back to the car, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me. The forest seemed darker now, the trees more foreboding. When I reached the car, I glanced back one last time, half expecting to see the man standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. But there was nothing. Only the stillness of the trees and the faint hum of insects filled the air. I got back in the car and locked the doors, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. As I pulled back onto the road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him emerge from the trees and start walking after me. But the road remained empty, stretching out behind me like a ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the encroaching night. The encounter stayed with me as I continued my drive. I couldn't shake the image of the man's face, or the way he had vanished so suddenly. Questions swirled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Who was he? Why had he been standing there, alone on such a remote stretch of road? And why had he fled into the woods when I tried to help him? I thought about stopping at the next town to report the incident, but when I finally reached civilization, the streets were deserted, and the only building with lights on was a small diner. I parked in front of it, hesitating for a moment before deciding to go inside. The waitress behind the counter gave me a polite smile as I took a seat, but I couldn't bring myself to bring up what I'd seen. It sounded too strange, too unreal. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard a conversation between two older men sitting at a nearby table. They were talking about the stretch of highway I had just driven through, mentioning how it had a reputation for strange occurrences. My ears perked up, and I couldn't resist asking them what they meant. One of the men looked at me, his expression serious, and said there had been stories for years about people seeing figures by the side of the road who would disappear when approached. I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke. He described encounters eerily similar to mine, and the more he talked, the more certain I became that what I had experienced wasn't just a figment of my imagination. When I asked if anyone had ever found out who the figures were, he shook his head. No one knows, he said. Some say they're spirits. Others think it's just folks playing tricks. But whatever it is, it's enough to make you think twice about stopping on that road at night. I left the diner feeling more unsettled than ever. As I got back in my car and continued my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brushed up against something beyond explanation. Even now, I can't drive past a lonely stretch of road without glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see a figure standing there, waiting. Story 17. I pulled into the truck stop after a long stretch on the highway, eager for a break and a warm meal. The parking lot was dimly lit, the yellow lights casting long shadows over the rows of trucks and cars. As I parked, I noticed a man standing by one of the big rigs. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a cap pulled low over his face. His stance was still, his gaze fixed on the lot. Curious, I waved to him, trying to be friendly, but he didn't react. He didn't nod or move, just stood there, as though carved out of stone. It was odd, but I shrugged it off, figuring he was deep in thought or perhaps tired from a long haul. Truckers had their own routines, and I didn't want to intrude. The diner attached to the truck stop was small and unassuming, with a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly in the night. I walked inside, the doorbell chiming softly as I entered. The smell of fried food and coffee greeted me, and a few other travelers sat scattered at tables, eating quietly. I took a seat by the window where I could still see the parking lot and the man by his truck. As I waited for my food, I found myself glancing outside more often than I meant to. The trucker hadn't moved. He stood in the exact same spot, his silhouette framed by the glow of the parking lot lights. There was something unsettling about his stillness, as though he were waiting for something or someone. I told myself it was none of my business and focused on my meal when it arrived. The food was comforting in its simplicity, a plate of scrambled eggs and toast with a side of hash browns. I ate slowly, letting the warmth of the diner and the murmur of conversations around me soothe my nerves. Still, every so often, my eyes drifted back to the window. The man was still there, unmoving. It began to feel as though he were part of the scenery, an immovable fixture in the night. By the time I finished eating, the diner had quieted even more. The other patrons had left, and the waitress was wiping down tables with a tired expression. I paid my bill and thanked her, stepping back into the cool night air. The parking lot was as quiet as I had left it, but when I glanced toward where the trucker had been standing, I froze. The truck was gone. There was no sign of it, no rumble of an engine fading into the distance. It was as though the rig and the man had vanished without a trace. I scanned the lot, half expecting to see him further down, perhaps parked in another space, but it was empty. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down on me like a weight. A chill ran down my spine as I walked to my car, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I had missed something important. My car was parked near where the truck had been, and as I approached, I noticed something on the ground. It was a small piece of paper, fluttering slightly in the breeze. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was blank, save for a faint, oily smudge in the corner. It could have been nothing, a scrap of trash left behind, but the sight of it made my stomach churn. I looked around again, half expecting the trucker to reappear, but the lot remained eerily still. Getting into my car, I locked the doors out of habit, my fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty space where the truck had been. The thought crossed my mind that maybe he had driven off while I was paying my bill. But the diner's windows had a clear view of the lot. I would have seen him leave, or at least heard the engine roar to life. Shaking my head, I started the car and pulled out of the lot, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The highway stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt winding into the night. But as I drove, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. The trucker's blank stare, the eerie stillness, and the sudden disappearance of his rig all swirled in my mind. Miles passed, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the road doing little to calm my nerves. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the truck's headlights looming behind me. The road was empty, though, a dark void stretching into the horizon. It was as though the world had shrunk to just me and my car. Eventually, I spotted a rest area and decided to pull over, needing a moment to collect myself. The rest stop was deserted, the vending machines humming softly under the fluorescent lights. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the crisp night air and trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease. As I leaned against the hood of my car, I thought about the trucker again. Maybe it had all been a coincidence, a trick of my tired mind. Truckers had schedules to keep, and maybe he'd left while I wasn't paying attention. But deep down, I couldn't convince myself. There was something about the way he had stood there, watching the lot, that didn't feel right. After a while, I got back into the car and continued my journey. The night seemed darker now, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds. The miles stretched on, the highway empty and silent. And though I tried to focus on the road ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, in the shadows, the trucker was still watching. Story 18. I always keep my doors locked when I sleep in the truck. It's second nature at this point, a habit ingrained from years of hauling loads across desolate highways and parking in sketchy rest stops. That night I had parked in an isolated lot just off a back road, far from any prying eyes. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The day had been long, and I was too exhausted to care about how lonely the place felt. I double-checked the locks on the doors before climbing into the sleeper cab. The familiar hum of the truck's engine had been comforting as I drifted off, but when I woke up, something felt off. It wasn't the usual stiffness in my back or the faint chill in the air. It was an unease I couldn't shake. My hand instinctively reached for the flashlight I kept near the bed. That's when I noticed it. One of the doors was slightly ajar, just enough to let in a sliver of moonlight. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, my mind racing to remember if I had locked it. I was certain I had, but doubt started to creep in. I slipped out of the cab, my boots crunching softly against the gravel as I stepped into the cold night. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and motor oil. I shone the flashlight around the perimeter, its beams slicing through the darkness. My heart sank when I spotted the tire tracks. The tracks were fresh, the grooves sharp against the dirt. They led straight up to the passenger side of the truck, stopping just inches from the door. Whoever had been there had been deliberate, their vehicle positioned to avoid the driver's side where I would have been. My chest tightened as I imagined someone standing just outside while I slept, their intentions unknown. I followed the tracks with the flashlight, tracing their path as they curved away from the truck and disappeared into the distance. They hadn't been there when I parked. Of that I was sure. Whoever it was had come and gone in the dead of night, leaving no other signs of their presence. The thought made my skin crawl. I walked the perimeter of the lot, checking for anything else that might explain what had happened. The gravel lot stretched wide and empty, bordered by thick woods on one side and a barren field on the other. The stillness felt oppressive now, every shadow a potential threat. Returning to the truck, I inspected the door that had been left ajar. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches or damage to the lock. It was as if whoever had opened it knew exactly how to avoid making a scene. The thought made my stomach churn. I climbed back into the cab, locking the doors with shaking hands. My flashlight rested on the passenger seat, its beam now off but its weight reassuring. I debated whether to stay or leave, but my exhaustion won out. I decided to stay, though sleep was no longer an option. The hours crept by, each one marked by the slow crawl of the moon across the sky. My mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Was it someone looking for an easy target? Or had they been watching me, waiting for the right moment? The not knowing was the worst part. As dawn approached, I finally dared to step out again. The early light revealed the tracks more clearly, their direction leading toward a small access road I hadn't noticed the night before. I followed them on foot, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound in the quiet morning. The tracks ended abruptly at the edge of the road, where the dirt transitioned to pavement. There were no other clues, no sign of who might have been there or why. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty road and feeling a chill run down my spine. I returned to the truck, my mind heavy with unanswered questions. I decided to report the incident to the nearest station once I hit the main highway. There was no telling if the police would take it seriously, but I figured it was better than doing nothing. As I drove away from the lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every car I passed on the road felt like a potential threat, every shadow in the trees a pair of eyes. It was irrational, I told myself, but the unease refused to fade. For the next few days I found myself double-checking every lock, every door, every corner of the lots where I parked. The incident had shaken me more than I cared to admit. It wasn't just the thought of someone being so close while I was vulnerable, it was the fact that they had left without a trace. Weeks later, I heard a story from another trucker at a rest stop. He mentioned something similar happening to him in the same area, his truck door left open and tire tracks leading away. The two of us exchanged uneasy glances, both wondering if it was just coincidence or something more sinister. Even now, the memory lingers. I've taken to parking in well-lit areas whenever I can, even if it means going out of my way. The locks on my truck have been upgraded, and I've added a security camera to the cab. But no matter what precautions I take, I can't shake the feeling that someone out there knows how close they came to finding me unprepared. Some nights, when I'm parked in another isolated lot, I catch myself staring at the door, waiting for it to move. The fear doesn't go away, it just becomes another part of the job. Story 19. I took a route through the mountains one night, a road I'd driven many times before, and everything seemed fine. The air was cool, and the sky above was dotted with stars. It was the kind of night that made you feel at peace, as if nothing could go wrong. But something felt off. As I made my way around a tight bend, I noticed headlights far behind me in my rearview mirror. I wasn't sure when they had appeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck had been there for a while. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a quiet stretch of road, and there were always a few late-night travelers passing through. I adjusted my grip on the steering wheel, focusing on the road ahead. The headlights remained at a distance, keeping the same space between us, not gaining on me but never falling back either. I thought maybe the driver was just following the same route as me, keeping a safe distance, or maybe they were in no rush. As I continued down the mountain pass, I tried to distract myself by humming softly along with the radio. The monotonous sound of the engine and the occasional rattle of the road under my tires made it easy to slip into a rhythm. But every time I glanced in my side mirror, I couldn't help but notice the truck's headlights. They hadn't moved, and it was starting to feel like they were just waiting. I felt a creeping unease in the pit of my stomach, but I dismissed it, telling myself it was nothing. After a few more miles, I decided to pull over and take a break. There was a small turnout up ahead, and I figured it would give me a moment to stretch my legs and maybe shake off the weird feeling. I slowed down and turned into the gravel spot, coming to a stop at the edge of the road. I turned off the engine, the silence enveloping me, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I checked my side mirror, expecting the truck to pass me, but it didn't. The headlights were still there, shining through the dark. I sat in the car for a few moments staring at the mirror. The truck hadn't moved. The headlights stayed in place, as if the vehicle were parked just beyond my sight. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe the driver had stopped for a break as well, or perhaps they had a mechanical issue. But something didn't feel right. I looked around the empty mountain road, the darkness pressing in on all sides. The air felt colder, the night somehow heavier. A shiver ran down my spine, and I decided I'd had enough of the waiting game. I turned the key in the ignition, but before I could pull out, something made me pause. The truck's headlights were getting bigger, not in the way they would if the vehicle was getting closer, but in a more unnatural way. The shadows from the headlights in my side mirror seemed to stretch, grow, as if the truck were somehow looming closer without moving at all. I blinked, trying to clear my mind, but when I looked again, the truck's shape was still the same. Only now it felt wrong. It felt like it was staring at me. I threw the car into reverse, my hands shaking as I backed up, my eyes glued to the mirror. The headlights didn't budge. I pulled forward again, my heart racing. Still, the headlights stayed in place. It was as if they were locked onto me, fixed in the same spot. The more I tried to move, the more I felt like the truck was somehow tethered to me. The growing shadow of the truck in my side mirror was unsettling, as if the truck's presence was expanding beyond its headlights, filling the air with an invisible weight. My pulse quickened, and I felt a surge of panic rise within me. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the tires spinning on the gravel as I sped back onto the road. The headlights didn't follow, but they didn't disappear either. They remained there, still and unwavering, watching. I kept glancing at my side mirror, the truck's shape now seeming to stretch out in the distance. The road ahead was dark and winding, and I tried to focus on it, to block out the growing sense of dread creeping up my spine. I rounded another sharp bend, my headlights cutting through the darkness. But when I looked again, the truck's headlights were still in the mirror, right behind me. I was sure they hadn't moved, not a single inch. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. I didn't dare slow down or stop again. Every instinct told me to keep driving, to get as far away from whatever was behind me as possible. But no matter how fast I went, no matter how many turns I took, the truck remained there, its headlights never changing. My breath was shallow and my mind raced. What was going on? I had no explanation, no logical reason for what I was seeing. The road stretched out before me, winding through the mountain pass, but I could feel the weight of the truck's presence like a dark cloud hanging over me. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The headlights were gone. Just like that, they were no longer there. I almost felt a sense of relief, but something didn't sit right. The truck had vanished without a trace, as if it had never been there at all. I didn't slow down. I kept driving, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, not daring to look back. The mountain pass stretched on for miles, and I kept driving until I reached the nearest town. I pulled into a gas station, my hands still trembling as I shut off the engine. I stepped out of the car, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The night felt eerily quiet now, the hum of the gas station lights the only sound. But in the back of my mind I knew something had been following me, something that wasn't easily explained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't done with me yet. Story 20. I was driving along an empty stretch of highway late at night, the road ahead illuminated only by my headlights. The hum of my tires on the asphalt and the occasional crackle of the CB radio were the only sounds breaking the silence. I had been on the road for hours, eager to make it to the next town before stopping for the night. The isolation was almost comforting until the CB crackled again, breaking through the static. "There's someone in your rear view," a voice said, distorted but clear enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced into the mirror instinctively, my heart pounding, but the road behind me was as empty as it had been for miles. I picked up the receiver and responded, my voice steady despite the unease creeping in. "Who is this?" "I don't see anyone." The static returned, offering no reply. I shook my head, telling myself it was probably some bored trucker playing a prank. Still, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling the message left behind. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror more often now, scanning for any sign of movement. The road remained desolate, the darkness pressing in on either side of me like a suffocating blanket. As I rounded a bend, my headlights caught the faint outline of a large truck parked on the shoulder, its cab dark and lifeless. I barely had time to register it before my CB crackled again. "You're not looking close enough," the voice said, sending a chill down my spine. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I passed the truck, the uneasy feeling growing stronger. Moments later, my rearview mirror filled with headlights as a truck pulled onto the road behind me. The lights were off at first, the vehicle barely visible, but then they flicked on, blindingly bright. My stomach sank as I realized it was the same truck I had just passed. The driver had been waiting for me. I pressed down on the accelerator, putting as much distance as I could between us, but the truck matched my speed effortlessly. It stayed close, the high beams glaring in my mirror and making it nearly impossible to see the road ahead. My pulse raced as I tried to think of what to do. Stopping wasn't an option, and there were no other cars or exits in sight. The CB crackled again, the voice more taunting this time. "You can't outrun him." My heart pounded as I stared at the receiver, wondering how the voice seemed to know exactly what was happening. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. There was no answer, just static, and the truck behind me blared its horn. I swerved slightly, trying to regain control as panic threatened to take over. The truck was so close now that I could make out the faint outline of the driver in the cab. They didn't seem to be in any hurry to pass or back off, just maintaining their position like a predator stalking prey. I scanned the road ahead, hoping for a rest stop, a gas station, anything. Finally, I saw a sign for a way station a mile ahead and made a snap decision. If the station was manned, I could find help there. I slowed down, signaling as I pulled toward the exit. To my relief, the truck stayed on the highway, its headlights fading into the distance. My shoulders sagged with relief as I rolled into the station, the building dimly lit but welcoming. I parked and hurried inside, where a lone attendant sat behind the counter, looking up from a magazine as I entered. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyeing me curiously. I explained what had happened, my words tumbling out in a rush. He frowned, glancing toward the highway. "We don't get much traffic out here this time of night. Did you get a plate number?" I shook my head, realizing I hadn't thought to look. The attendant nodded, his expression grim. "Well, you're safe here for now. You can wait a bit before heading back out if you want." I thanked him and sat down in one of the plastic chairs, trying to calm my nerves. The station felt secure, the hum of the fluorescent lights oddly comforting. After about 30 minutes, I decided to get back on the road, figuring the truck would be long gone by now. The attendant wished me luck as I left, and I pulled back onto the highway, the stretch ahead still empty and silent. For a while it seemed like the worst was over. I kept my speed steady, my eyes scanning the mirrors for any sign of movement. Just as I started to relax, the CB crackled one final time. "You should have stayed put," the voice said, colder and more menacing than before. My blood ran cold as I checked the rearview mirror. The truck was back, its headlights off, barely visible but unmistakable. It had been waiting for me, lurking in the shadows. I floored the accelerator, the engine roaring as I pushed the car to its limits. The truck followed, its lights still off, a hulking shadow in the darkness. My hands trembled on the wheel as I scanned the road ahead, praying for an exit, a town, anything. The miles stretched on, and the truck stayed close, never trying to overtake me, just keeping pace. Finally, I saw the faint glow of city lights on the horizon, a beacon of hope in the endless darkness. I pressed on, the truck still behind me, but as I approached the city limits, it slowed down and pulled off to the side of the road. I watched in the mirror as it came to a stop, its silhouette barely visible against the night. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of a well-lit gas station in town. Shaking, I parked and sat in my car, trying to process what had happened. The truck was gone, but the memory of its headlights and the voice on the CB lingered. To this day, I still don't know who or what was behind me on that lonely highway, but I've never driven that stretch of road at night again. Story 21. It was late, and I was on a long, quiet stretch of road. The night was pitch black, and the only sound was the hum of my tires against the asphalt. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a faint glow over the empty highway. I had been driving for hours, my eyes growing heavy, but there was no turning back now. I had to keep going. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a truck parked by the side of the road. Its headlights were off, and there was no sign of any other vehicles around. At first, I thought it was just a broken down vehicle or someone taking a break, but something about it felt wrong. The truck was positioned too far off the shoulder, as though it had been deliberately placed there. I slowed down as I passed, my eyes darting to the driver's side window. The driver was sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead into the dark distance. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but I could make out the faint outline of his features. There was something eerie about the way he sat there, unmoving, as if he was waiting for something or someone. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them, as if they were watching me through the rearview mirror. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my heart started to race. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I had already passed the truck. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the unease lingered. I glanced over at the truck once more, my breath catching in my throat. The driver hadn't moved, and I could no longer see his face. I quickly looked away and forced myself to focus on the road ahead. The feeling of being watched didn't go away, though. My eyes kept flicking back to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the truck following me. But the road behind me remained empty, just the faint glow of my taillights fading into the darkness. I tried to shake off the discomfort, telling myself I was being paranoid. There were plenty of trucks on the road at night, and sometimes people just pull over for a rest. But this didn't feel like any normal rest stop. It felt like something more, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I continued down the road, I kept thinking about the truck and the driver. Why hadn't he moved? Why was he just sitting there, staring into the dark? I had been on that stretch of highway before, and I knew there was nothing around for miles, no gas stations, no houses, no lights. It was just endless road and wilderness. What was he waiting for out there? The thought gnawed at me, and I began to feel a growing sense of unease. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the truck and the driver. What if something had happened to him? What if he was in trouble? I thought about turning around to check on him, but the idea of going back down that stretch of road alone in the dark filled me with dread. I glanced at my phone, hoping for some kind of signal, but there was nothing. The small screen mocked me with its lack of bars. I had no way of calling for help if something went wrong. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights in the distance. But the road behind me remained as empty and silent as before. The silence of the night was broken by the sudden sound of a distant engine. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced in the mirror, expecting to see another car. But the sound grew louder, and I realized the engine was coming from behind me. I could feel my pulse quicken as I tried to make out the shape of the vehicle. My mind raced. Was it the truck? Had the driver decided to follow me? I didn't dare look back at first. The engine noise grew louder and closer, and I could feel the tension building in my chest. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I sped up, trying to put more distance between myself and whatever was behind me. But the sound of the engine only seemed to grow louder, matching my speed. It was as if the vehicle was right on my tail. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, and this time I saw a pair of headlights shining through the darkness, closing the gap between us. The truck. It was the same one I'd passed earlier, the one with the driver just sitting there staring into the distance. My stomach churned, and my grip on the wheel tightened. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I pull over and let it pass, or should I keep driving and hope the driver would eventually give up? My mind raced as I tried to make a decision. The truck was now so close that I could see the faint outline of the driver's face in the glow of the headlights. He wasn't looking at the road. He was staring straight at me, his face expressionless. A wave of terror washed over me. I had to get away. I slammed my foot down on the gas, pushing my car to its limits. The truck followed, maintaining its unnerving distance, as if it were toying with me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely focus on the road. All I could think about was getting away from that truck and the strange driver who seemed to be hunting me. The engine noise grew louder and louder, and the truck stayed right behind me. I could feel my pulse racing, my breath coming in short gasps. I looked at the road ahead, hoping for some sign of a turn or a way out. But all I saw was the dark stretch of highway, endless and unforgiving. There was no escape. Just as I was about to lose hope, a set of headlights appeared in the distance. Another car. I had never been so relieved to see another vehicle. The truck behind me slowed, as if it were deciding whether to follow the new car or stay with me. After what felt like an eternity, the truck finally pulled off to the side of the road, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't stop to find out what had happened. I just kept driving, my hands shaking and my mind racing. The rest of the drive was a blur, and when I finally reached my destination, I couldn't get out of the car fast enough. I looked over my shoulder one last time, half expecting to see those headlights behind me. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road stretching out behind me. Story 22. I stopped for fuel at a remote station late one night. The only lights coming from the flickering neon sign and the glow of the pump. The silence around me was almost deafening, with nothing but the hum of the fuel nozzle filling the air. I was the only one there, or so I thought. As I pumped the gas, I noticed a figure standing by the station's dimly lit wall, a trucker leaning against the building, smoking a cigarette. He didn't say a word to me, but I could feel his eyes following my every move, like a weight pressing down on me. At first, I tried to ignore him, focusing on the task at hand. But every time I glanced over, he was still there, his back against the wall, the smoke curling up into the night sky. His expression was hard to read, but his eyes were locked on me, never wavering. I finished filling up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My mind raced, wondering why he hadn't approached me, or even said hello like most truckers do at these kinds of stations. I paid for the gas inside the small convenience store, keeping an eye on the man through the window. He hadn't moved an inch, his gaze still fixed on the spot where I was parked. The clerk behind the counter barely acknowledged me, too engrossed in whatever he was watching on the TV behind him. I quickly grabbed my receipt, ready to leave, but something held me back. The unease I felt from the trucker's stare was unsettling, and the longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was trapped in some kind of waiting game. As I stepped out of the store, I could see him more clearly now, his face illuminated by the dim light. He was older, with a scruffy beard and a weathered look that spoke of long hours on the road. His truck, parked near the pumps, was an old rig, its paint chipped and faded. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves, and started to walk back to my car. But the trucker didn't budge. His eyes never left me, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a smirk cross his face. I reached my car and quickly got inside, locking the doors as I sat there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and the trucker was still standing there, the cigarette dangling from his lips. The tension in the air was thick, and I felt like I was being watched from all angles. I told myself to just start the car and drive off, but something in my gut told me that wouldn't be enough to shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to take a different route, heading back toward the main highway. As I pulled out of the station, I noticed that the trucker hadn't moved. His eyes were still fixed on me, even as I turned the corner and disappeared from view. The whole situation felt like a strange encounter that couldn't be explained away by simple coincidence. The man's presence lingered in my mind, like an itch I couldn't scratch, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something that might have been far worse than I realized. The further I drove, the more the events replayed in my mind. It was a quiet night, with nothing but the sound of my tires on the road, but I couldn't help but feel like something was following me. Every time I passed a shadowy area, I felt the urge to look over my shoulder, half expecting to see the trucker's headlights or the outline of his truck in the distance. I told myself it was just paranoia, that I was overthinking things, but deep down I knew there was something more to the encounter than I could understand. Hours later, I found myself on a stretch of highway with no other cars in sight. The roads were winding and desolate, and I couldn't help but think back to the station. I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, if I had let my mind play tricks on me. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror again, the unsettling thought crossed my mind: what if the trucker had followed me, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself? I drove faster, hoping the feeling would pass, but it didn't. The more I thought about the trucker, the more I became convinced that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. His silent stare, his stillness, it all felt like part of a larger game that I didn't want to be a part of. The trucker had been there for a reason, and whatever that reason was, I wasn't sticking around to find out. As I finally approached the next town, the unease started to fade. I pulled into a well-lit gas station, surrounded by other cars and people, and I finally allowed myself to breathe a little easier. The trucker, whoever he was no longer a threat, at least not here. I shook my head, wondering if I had been too quick to judge the man. Maybe he was just a trucker on a late-night break, nothing more. But deep down I knew that I would never forget the feeling of his eyes on me, and I would never look at a lonely gas station the same way again. I filled up again, this time with more confidence, and continued on my journey. But the quiet of the night had changed, and I couldn't escape the feeling that there was always something lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. The trucker's stare had been more than just a glance, it had been a warning, and I had a feeling that if I ever found myself back at that station, I wouldn't be so lucky the second time around. Story 23. I was delivering a load across state lines when my GPS started glitching. It kept rerouting me to unfamiliar roads, suggesting turns I didn't remember being on the map. I was used to driving long distances, but something about the route felt off. The further I went, the more I questioned the directions, but the GPS was insistent. Each time I glanced at it, it flashed a new route, even though I hadn't asked for one. The sun had started to dip behind the horizon, casting a deep orange glow across the road. The highway stretched ahead, empty and quiet, save for the hum of my truck's engine. I could feel the weight of the load in the back, a constant reminder of my responsibility to deliver it safely. I looked up, and that's when I noticed another truck in the distance, its headlights faint but growing closer. I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road for miles, so the appearance of this truck felt oddly timed. As I continued down the road, I took a turn as instructed by the glitching GPS. The truck behind me followed, maintaining the same distance between us. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine, telling myself it was just another trucker on the same route. But as I made another turn, the truck mirrored my movements, never breaking its steady pace. My heart began to race, a knot tightening in my stomach. I decided to test it. I took a sharp left, hoping the other driver would be forced to go a different direction. But the truck behind me swerved with ease, taking the same turn without hesitation. It was almost as if the driver knew exactly where I was going. I glanced at my rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the truck's headlights, now much closer. But the driver's face was obscured by the glare. The chill in my bones intensified. I increased my speed, trying to lose the truck. The road was winding and the landscape had become more desolate with each passing mile. But no matter how fast I went, the truck stayed with me, its headlights a constant presence in my mirror. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that this wasn't just a coincidence. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping to get a better look, but as soon as I stopped, the truck did the same, pulling up behind me with its engine idling. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I watched the truck. I could hear the rumble of its engine, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. The driver didn't make any move to approach my truck, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I debated getting out to confront the driver, but something inside me told me not to. The unease in my gut grew, telling me to stay put and not engage. After a few moments, I decided to drive off again, hoping the truck would finally turn off or go in a different direction. I started to accelerate slowly, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror. To my relief, the truck didn't follow. It stayed in place, its headlights now fading in the distance. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. But as I continued down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The GPS continued to reroute me, the unfamiliar roads growing darker and more isolated. The truck had disappeared from my rearview mirror, but I couldn't forget the eerie feeling of being followed. The roads were narrow, and the trees on either side seemed to close in, casting long shadows across the pavement. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but my mind kept drifting back to the truck, to the way it had mirrored my every move. What if it hadn't been a coincidence? As the hours passed, I finally reached a small town, my nerves still on edge. The GPS had led me to an unfamiliar area, and I wasn't sure what to expect. The streetlights flickered as I drove through the empty town, and the silence was almost suffocating. There were no other vehicles on the road, no signs of life. I decided to pull into a truck stop, hoping to get some rest and shake off the feeling that had settled over me. I parked my truck and stepped out, stretching my legs after hours of driving. The night air was cool, and the town felt deserted. I walked into the truck stop, hoping to grab a coffee and clear my head. As I stood at the counter, I couldn't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see the truck I had been followed by. But there was nothing. No sign of the vehicle, no headlights cutting through the darkness. I finished my coffee and walked back to my truck, trying to push the unsettling encounter out of my mind. The night was quiet, too quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I climbed back into my cab, locking the doors and starting the engine. As I prepared to leave the truck stop, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, just to be sure. To my horror, I saw the faint glow of headlights in the distance, slowly getting closer. The truck was back. My heart raced as I slammed my foot on the accelerator, pushing my truck faster down the road. The headlights behind me grew brighter, closer, as if the truck had never left. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. The road stretched on ahead, and I had no idea where I was going or what was following me. All I knew was that I had to keep moving, hoping I could outrun whatever had decided to make me its target. Story 24. The long drive had taken its toll. My eyes were heavy, and my body ached from hours of being on the road. At 3 a.m., I finally decided to pull into a rest stop to get some rest. The fluorescent lights of the rest area cast an eerie glow over the empty parking lot, and the silence was only broken by the occasional hum of a passing car in the distance. I parked in the farthest spot, far enough from the few trucks already there, and reclined my seat, hoping to get a few hours of sleep. I closed my eyes, trying to relax, but sleep didn't come easily. The sound of my own breathing and the hum of the engine seemed to heighten the silence around me. I shifted in my seat, trying to find a comfortable position, but every time I thought I might drift off, something kept pulling me back to full awareness. That's when I heard the tapping. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the engine. I froze, unsure if I had imagined it. My heart began to race, and I held my breath, straining to listen. The tapping came again, louder this time, and it was coming from my window. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound, but when I looked out, there was no one there. Just the empty parking lot and the faint glow of the lights above. I blinked, unsure of what to make of it. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was the wind or a tree branch brushing against the window. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired and imagining things. But the moment I looked away, the tapping started again. This time it was much closer, much sharper. It was as though someone or something was right outside my window. My pulse quickened, and I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. The parking lot remained empty, and the tapping continued, relentless and unnerving. I grabbed my phone, trying to steady my shaking hands. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the car, and I checked the time. It was 3:15 a.m., the dead of night, and I was alone in this desolate rest stop. I rolled down the window a fraction of an inch, hoping to catch a breeze or maybe hear something that could explain the noise. But all I heard was the tapping. It was getting louder now, closer than ever, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, torn between the need to know what was out there and the overwhelming fear that whatever it was, I might not want to see it. The tapping stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. My breath caught in my throat. For a long moment I sat perfectly still, not daring to move. The silence stretched on, suffocating and thick, until I couldn't take it any longer. Slowly I turned my head back to the window, peering out into the darkness. The rest stop was still empty, no sign of anyone nearby. But as I stared out into the blackness, a chill ran down my spine. There, on the far side of the parking lot, just beyond the shadows, a figure stood. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I focused, I realized it was a person no more than a silhouette, but standing perfectly still, watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickly pulled my head back from the window, hoping I hadn't been seen. The tapping resumed, this time louder than ever, right next to my door. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My entire body was frozen in fear. I dared not look out the window again, but I could feel the presence of the figure, standing just outside, waiting. The tapping came again, and I could hear it now with chilling clarity. It was not just a tap, but a deliberate knock, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I couldn't take it anymore. I fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The fear of whatever was out there was overpowering. I started the car, the engine roaring to life, and slammed the car into reverse. My eyes darted to the side mirror, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw the figure moving closer. Without thinking, I sped out of the rest stop, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't care if I was breaking the speed limit, I just needed to get away. The further I drove, the more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just my overactive imagination running wild in the dark. But the tapping, the figure, and the feeling of being watched lingered in my mind, refusing to let go. As I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me, but there was nothing. The road behind me remained empty, the rest stop nothing more than a fading memory in my rearview. I didn't know what had happened back there, but I was grateful to be far away from it. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a well-lit gas station and parked under a bright streetlight. My hands were still shaking and my body was drenched in sweat. I sat there for a long while, staring at the dark road behind me, trying to calm my racing heart. The memory of the tapping, the figure, and the overwhelming feeling of dread stayed with me. I never stopped at that rest stop again. Every time I passed it on my future drives, I couldn't help but glance over at the empty parking lot. But the lights never seemed as bright again, and the air never felt as still. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been waiting for me there, it was still out there, watching. Story 25. It was a quiet night on the road when I pulled into a small diner, hoping to grab a cup of coffee and stretch my legs. The headlights of my truck cut through the darkness as I parked in front of the dimly lit building. It was the kind of place that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in hours, with only the faint hum of the neon sign flickering above the door. I wasn't expecting much, just a quick stop to refuel before getting back on the road. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside, the smell of stale coffee and greasy food hanging in the air. The diner was empty, except for one other trucker sitting at the counter, hunched over his mug. His weathered face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his cap, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had settled on him. He didn't acknowledge me as I walked in, which was fine by me. I wasn't in the mood for conversation. I made my way to the counter, taking the seat a few stools down from the trucker. The waitress behind the counter barely glanced up from the old register as she poured my coffee. I tried to make small talk, asking her how her night was going, but she only gave a tight-lipped smile and mumbled something about the usual. The silence between us felt heavier than it should have, but I didn't think much of it. As I sipped my coffee, I kept my eyes on the trucker at the counter. He hadn't moved since I walked in, and his coffee sat untouched in front of him. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease, like there was something off about the whole situation. I glanced around the diner. Everything was exactly as I'd expect for a place this late at night. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting an eerie glow on the cracked linoleum floor. I finished my coffee quickly, feeling the urge to get back on the road. I stood up and made my way to the counter to pay, but as I approached, I noticed something strange. The waitress was staring at the trucker, her hands shaking slightly as she rang up my order. There was an unmistakable panic in her eyes, a fear that I couldn't place. I raised an eyebrow, but before I could say anything, she spoke in a low voice, barely audible above the hum of the diner. "He's been dead for years." I froze, my hand still on the counter. The words hung in the air like a cloud, and for a moment, I couldn't process them. I glanced back at the trucker, who was still sitting motionless at the counter, his face obscured by the brim of his cap. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge us. My heart began to race as I tried to make sense of what she had said. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I was trying to keep my tone casual, but the words came out shakier than I intended. The waitress swallowed hard and looked around nervously, as if afraid someone might overhear. She leaned in closer, her voice trembling. "That man," she said, pointing discreetly at the trucker. "He's been coming in here every night for as long as I can remember. But he died in a crash years ago. I don't know how he's still here." A chill ran down my spine as I tried to process what she was telling me. I turned back to the trucker, my eyes scanning him for any sign of life. His clothes were worn, his boots dusty from the road, but there was nothing about him that looked unusual, nothing that screamed ghost. Yet, the way the waitress spoke, the fear in her voice, it all made my stomach churn. I forced myself to look away and focus on the cashier, who was now visibly shaken. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to sound more composed than I felt. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the trucker. "He used to come in here all the time. One night, a few years ago, he didn't show up. I heard he'd been in a bad accident, lost control of his rig, and went off the road. They said there were no survivors, but he still comes in, night after night like clockwork. I don't know how." My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. I wanted to leave, to get back to the safety of my truck, and put as much distance between me and this strange place as possible. But something kept me rooted to the spot. I had to know more. I glanced at the trucker again, and this time I noticed something different. His reflection in the glass behind the counter was blurry, like a distortion in the air. He hadn't moved, hadn't even acknowledged me. My heart skipped a beat as I turned back to the waitress. Is he even real?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her face pale. I don't know anymore. Sometimes I think I see him walk out the door, but when I check the parking lot, his truck's still here. It's like he's trapped in this place, coming in every night but never really leaving." The words hung in the air like a thick fog, and I suddenly felt like I was suffocating. I glanced around the diner, half expecting to see more strange figures lurking in the shadows, but the place remained empty except for the two of us. The trucker's presence was suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my curiosity kept me rooted in place. I turned back to the trucker one last time, and this time, he lifted his head slightly, just enough for me to see his eyes empty, hollow, like two black pits staring back at me. Without a word, I grabbed my change from the cashier, my hands shaking as I hurried toward the door. I didn't look back, didn't dare glance over my shoulder. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the bell above the door jingling softly as I left. I didn't drive far before I glanced in my rearview mirror. The diner was still there, but the trucker's rig was gone. I never stopped at that diner again, but every time I pass that stretch of highway, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, he's still driving, still waiting. Story 26. My truck had broken down on an old highway, far from any town. The engine sputtered and died as I coasted to the side of the road, and I cursed my luck. It was already getting late, the sky turning a dusky orange, and the stretch of road was desolate. I had no choice but to wait for help, hoping that someone would pass by soon. Minutes turned into hours, and I began to feel the weight of the isolation. The occasional car would pass, but none slowed down and none offered assistance. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. Just as I started to consider walking to the nearest gas station, a car pulled up beside me, its engine purring softly. The car was an old sedan, one of those that seemed like it had been through 100 miles of rough roads. The window rolled down, and the driver leaned out, smiling. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice oddly smooth. His face was pale, almost unnaturally so, and his eyes didn't blink as he stared at me. There was something unsettling about him, something I couldn't place, but my instincts screamed at me to refuse. I hesitated for a moment, looking at the man's expressionless face. "No, I'm fine," I said, trying to sound casual. "I've called for help, so I'll wait here." But he didn't seem to take the hint. He leaned forward, his smile never wavering, and repeated, "Come on, I can take you wherever you need to go." The offer sounded too eager, too insistent, and it sent a chill down my spine. I stepped back, instinctively locking the door of my truck as if it would somehow protect me. "Really, I'm okay. Thank you, but I'll wait for my ride." The man didn't move though. He stayed there, watching me with those unnerving eyes, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. His gaze didn't falter, and the longer I stared at him, the more I felt an odd sense of dread building in my chest. He asked again, his voice now a little more urgent. "It's no trouble, just hop in. I'll get you where you need to go." His tone was calm, but there was something off about it. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, as if he already knew what I would do before I did it. I shook my head and stepped back again, trying to create distance. "No," I said firmly. "I'm fine, thank you." But the man didn't take no for an answer. His car remained where it was, parked right next to mine, and his eyes never left me. I could feel his gaze even through the truck window. My heart began to race, and I tried to look away, but his stare was magnetic, like something out of a nightmare. He asked again, and this time his voice was quieter, almost too soft. "Please, just get in the car." The air felt thick, heavy, as if the world around me had frozen. I glanced around, hoping for another vehicle to pass by, but the road was empty. There was no one else, no help coming. I looked back at the man, who was still waiting for me to make a decision, still smiling, his eyes wide and unblinking. I couldn't take it anymore. "No," I said, my voice trembling now. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The man's smile faded, but his eyes didn't. They remained locked on mine, cold and unblinking. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, and I wanted to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from his. I don't know how much time passed, maybe seconds, maybe minutes, but the silence between us was deafening. The only sound was the hum of his engine and my own shaky breath. Finally, the man broke the silence. "You're being foolish," he said, his voice low and calm, but there was a hint of something dark in it now. "You don't have to wait here alone. It's not safe." I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest, and I realized that I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to get away, had to escape this unsettling man and his strange, persistent offer. I quickly opened the door of my truck, my hands shaking as I grabbed my bag and slammed it shut behind me. I looked back at the car, but it hadn't moved. The man's face was still pale, still staring at me, and his eyes didn't blink. I didn't wait for him to speak again. I turned and ran, not looking back, not daring to. I didn't stop running until I reached a small, dimly lit convenience store a few miles down the road. I burst through the door, my chest heaving, and the clerk behind the counter looked up in surprise. "Are you okay?" he asked, noticing my wild eyes and ragged breath. I didn't answer. I just stood there, trembling, trying to shake the image of that man's pale face and unblinking eyes from my mind. After a few minutes, I pulled myself together enough to ask if I could use the phone to call for help. The clerk nodded. and I dialed my roadside assistance service, still unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. When I finally stepped outside to wait, I checked the road, but there was no sign of the man or his car. It was as if he had never been there at all. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Even as the tow truck arrived and I got into the cab, I couldn't stop glancing nervously into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale face watching me from the darkness. I never saw him again, but I couldn't forget the strange, persistent offer. It was a night I wouldn't soon forget. Story 27. I always parked in the same spot when I stopped at the truck stop. It was familiar, tucked in a corner away from the bustle of the other vehicles, offering me some peace and quiet after a long drive. The space was always empty when I arrived, and I had come to rely on it as my safe haven during my stops. But one night, as I pulled in, I noticed something strange. A truck was parked in my usual spot. It wasn't just any truck. The rig was an old model, its paint chipped and faded, the kind of truck that looked like it had seen better days. The headlights were off, and there was a thick layer of dust on the hood, as if it had been sitting there for a while. I frowned and glanced around, considering parking somewhere else, but something about the truck made me uneasy. It wasn't just the fact that it was in my spot, it was the stillness of it. The way it seemed to blend into the darkness. I pulled into an adjacent space, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping up my spine. The lot was quiet, save for the occasional hum of the nearby highway, and I figured it was just my tired mind playing tricks on me. But as I got out of the car and stretched, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was off. The truck, parked so perfectly still in the dark corner, felt like it was watching me. I glanced toward it, but no movement, no sign of life came from it. I made my way toward the diner, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. Inside, the warmth and the faint chatter of other truckers should have been comforting, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the truck. Every time I looked out the window, it was still there, sitting motionless under the flickering parking lot lights. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid, but the unease refused to let go. I ordered my usual, a simple cup of coffee and a plate of fries, but I barely touched it. Instead, my eyes kept wandering to the truck, the dark figure of it looming in the corner of my vision. I could feel it calling to me, though I couldn't explain why. There was something about the way the truck sat there, like it was waiting for something, or someone. The other patrons in the diner seemed oblivious, chatting amongst themselves, lost in their own world. I tried to join in, nodding politely when they spoke to me, but my mind was elsewhere. I couldn't stop thinking about the truck, the way it seemed to silently watch me from the shadows. I had parked in many truck stops over the years, and I had never felt this way before. It was as though the vehicle wasn't just a truck, it was a presence. Eventually, I paid my bill and stood up, forcing myself to move away from the diner window. I walked back to my car, but every step felt heavier than the last. I kept my eyes straight ahead, but I couldn't ignore the sense that something was wrong. I was almost back to my car when I heard a soft scrape of metal on concrete. It came from the direction of the truck, faint but distinct. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. The truck was still in the same spot, but I could have sworn I heard something. A sound. A movement. I quickly glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing next to the rig. But there was nothing. No one, just the truck, still as ever. My pulse quickened, and I moved faster, practically jogging back to my car. I opened the door and got inside, locking it almost automatically. I sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to calm my racing heart. The lot was empty now, save for the lone truck in the corner. The lights flickered above me, casting long shadows that made the entire scene feel even more unsettling. I started the engine and slowly pulled out of my space, keeping my eyes on the truck as I moved past it. I told myself it was nothing, just a strange coincidence. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the truck, it was the silence that surrounded it, the way it seemed to stand still, waiting for me to notice it. And as I glanced back one last time, I saw something I couldn't explain. For a brief moment, the lights on the truck flickered on. It was just for a second, a flash of brightness that illuminated the dark corner of the lot. But it was enough. My breath caught in my throat as I turned my attention back to the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't look back. I didn't want to. I drove for miles, the unease still gnawing at my thoughts. The road stretched on before me, endless and dark, but I couldn't shake the image of the truck from my mind. The way it had stood there, watching, waiting. The way the lights had flickered on and off, as if it had been trying to communicate something. It wasn't just an old truck, it was a warning. By the time I reached the next town, the unsettling feeling had settled into the pit of my stomach. I stopped at another truck stop, parking in an empty space far from the shadows of the corner lot. I stepped out of the car and stretched, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread. But as I looked around, I couldn't help but wonder, what had I really seen back there? What had been watching me? And more importantly, why did it feel like I had narrowly escaped something I couldn't understand? Story 28. After a long haul, I pulled into a rest stop, grateful for a chance to stretch my legs and grab something to eat. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that made everything feel still and eerie. The headlights of my truck illuminated the small lot, casting long shadows over the pavement. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and stale coffee, and the only sounds were the hum of the highway in the distance and the occasional rustle of wind. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the small building that housed the rest stop's convenience store. It was late, and the place was nearly empty, save for a few trucks parked at the far end of the lot. I had been on the road for hours, and all I wanted was a quick snack and some rest. As I passed the payphone near the entrance, I noticed a man standing next to it, his back to me. He didn't seem like he belonged. His clothes were ragged, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn cap. He was just standing there, motionless, as though waiting for something. I didn't think much of it at first, figuring he was just another traveler or someone down on their luck. But as I got closer, I felt an odd chill crawl up my spine. His head turned slowly, and his eyes locked onto mine. I stopped in my tracks, instinctively taking a step back. His gaze was intense, unblinking, as though he was sizing me up, or worse, trying to figure out if I was a threat. The silence between us stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, it was late, and I was tired. Then, in a voice so soft I could barely hear it over the distant hum of the highway, he whispered, "You should stay on the main road." The word sent a cold shiver through me, and I felt a lump form in my throat. His tone wasn't threatening, but there was something unsettling about the way he spoke, like he knew something I didn't. Before I could respond, he turned away and began walking toward the edge of the parking lot. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, and I watched as he disappeared into the darkness, blending into the night as though he had never been there. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just been warned about something, though I couldn't figure out what. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man's words echoed in my mind, "You should have stayed on the main road." What did he mean by that? I had been on the main road for most of my trip, but I had taken an exit to get to this rest stop. Maybe he was just a random person, someone who was a little off, but something told me that wasn't the case. I glanced around the lot, hoping to spot him again, but there was no sign of him. The payphone stood empty now, the receiver dangling loosely from its hook. I couldn't help but feel uneasy as I walked toward the store, my eyes darting around the lot, scanning the shadows for any movement. It was as if the man had disappeared into thin air. Inside the store, I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I grabbed a snack and paid for it, but my mind kept drifting back to the man by the payphone. Who was he? Why had he said what he did? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly avoided something, but what? As I walked back to my truck, I couldn't help but glance around again, half expecting the man to reappear out of nowhere. The parking lot seemed quieter now, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I got into the cab, locked the door, and sat there for a few moments, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I debated whether to leave the rest stop or stick around for a bit longer. The thought of driving on alone into the dark stretch of highway ahead didn't seem appealing, but neither did staying here, not knowing if that man was still lurking somewhere in the shadows. I started the truck and pulled out of the lot, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. As I drove down the road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. Or worse, the man's figure standing by the side of the road, watching me. But the road behind me remained empty, and the night stretched on, silent and still. I tried to convince myself it had all been a strange encounter with a troubled man, nothing more. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was something about that moment that didn't sit right with me. I drove for what felt like hours, my eyes growing heavy with fatigue. But no matter how tired I was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. Something I had narrowly avoided at that rest stop. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, focusing on the road ahead. But the memory of the man's words lingered, like a shadow that refused to fade. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into a well-lit truck stop and parked for the night. As I climbed into the sleeper cab, I locked the door and pulled the curtains shut, but I couldn't sleep. The image of the man by the payphone haunted me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had made a mistake by not listening to him. The next morning, I left the truck stop with a sense of unease that didn't quite leave me. The road ahead seemed just as lonely and quiet as the night before, and as I drove on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I never stopped at that rest stop again, and every time I passed it, I couldn't help but glance over, half expecting to see the man standing there once more, waiting for someone else. Story 29. I was driving on an empty road late one night, the kind of road that stretched endlessly through the quiet countryside, with no signs of life, except for the occasional flicker of my headlights cutting through the darkness. The moon was barely visible behind a veil of clouds, and the air outside felt still, as though the world had paused for a moment. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic beat of the tires on the asphalt were the only sounds that accompanied me. It was a peaceful night, or at least it seemed that way. As I drove, I noticed something ahead in the distance, a set of headlights dimly shining from the side of the road. At first, I thought it might be a car pulled over, perhaps someone in need of help or a trucker taking a break. The road was desolate, and the idea of offering assistance didn't seem entirely out of place. I slowed down as I approached, my eyes scanning the area for any signs of trouble. The truck, A large old model sat at an odd angle, the engine still running. The sound of the engine hummed in the quiet night air, a sound that felt strangely out of place against the stillness of everything around it. I passed the truck slowly, glancing at the driver as I went by. At first I didn't think much of it, assuming they were simply resting. But then, something about the scene struck me. The driver's face was frozen in place, their eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. They weren't moving at all. It was unsettling, like a mannequin placed behind a wheel. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror to see if anything had changed. The truck remained there, just as still as before, the headlights casting a dim glow across the empty road. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Maybe the driver had just fallen asleep, or maybe they were deep in thought, lost in their own world. But something about the way they sat there, unmoving and unblinking, made me uneasy. It wasn't normal. I glanced around the empty road again, wondering if I should stop and check on them. But then, a wave of caution washed over me. I didn't know this person, and it was late at night. There were no other cars on the road, and it wasn't like there was anyone else around to help. I wasn't sure if it was worth the risk, especially with the strange feeling lingering in the air. Despite my hesitation, I found myself slowing down as I continued down the road. My curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to go back and make sure everything was all right. I couldn't shake the image of that driver's eyes wide open, staring, unblinking. The longer I thought about it, the more the scene seemed off. What kind of person would just sit there, eyes fixed ahead, without moving at all? It didn't make sense. My foot hovered over the brake pedal as I considered turning around, but something in my gut told me not to. The unease that had settled in my chest deepened, and I pushed the thought aside, telling myself I was overreacting. But as I drove further down the road, the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. I couldn't shake the image of the driver's frozen stare, the stillness of the truck. It felt like something was wrong, something that went beyond just a simple roadside break. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the road ahead, but every few seconds, my mind would drift back to that truck. The truck that seemed to be waiting, its driver unmoving, unblinking, like a figure trapped in time. The more I thought about it, the more the image haunted me. After what felt like an eternity, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart racing. The night felt colder now, the silence pressing in around me. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty road ahead. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and my breath came in shallow bursts. I didn't want to turn back, but I couldn't just drive away either. The curiosity had become unbearable. I took a deep breath and turned the car around, my headlights cutting through the darkness as I headed back toward the truck. As I approached the truck again, I felt my pulse quicken. The truck was still there, parked in the same spot, the engine still running. The driver remained completely still, their eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. It was like nothing had changed, as though time itself had stopped. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. Something wasn't right. The longer I stared at the driver, the more I felt like they were staring back at me, as though they were aware of my presence, but unable to react. I felt trapped, like the air itself had thickened around me, and I couldn't move. I took another step toward the truck, my heart pounding in my chest. My legs felt heavy, reluctant to move, but I forced myself forward. The closer I got, the more the truck seemed to loom in front of me, its headlights casting long shadows across the road. The driver's eyes remained locked on the empty space ahead of them, completely motionless. I was close enough now to see the faintest twitch in their face, a subtle shift in their expression. But it wasn't enough to make me feel better. The truck, the driver, everything about the scene felt wrong. Suddenly, a loud crack broke the silence, and I jumped, my body tensing. The sound came from the woods on the side of the road, distant but sharp, like a branch snapping under pressure. I froze, unsure of what to do. My mind raced, and the feeling of unease intensified, threatening to overwhelm me. The truck's engine sputtered, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. It was as though the world was closing in on me, the air thick with tension. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and ran back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I slammed the door shut and sped away, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, not daring to look back. The headlights of the truck disappeared into the distance, but the image of the driver's unblinking eyes remained etched in my mind. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, my hands still shaking. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew something happened that night, something that couldn't be explained. And as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the truck and its driver were still out there, waiting. Story 30. It was nearing dawn when I pulled into a truck stop off the highway, exhausted after hours of driving through the night. The small lot was nearly empty, save for a few long-haul rigs parked in the distance. I decided to grab a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. I reclined my seat, wrapped myself in my jacket, and tried to ignore the strange sense of unease that had been creeping over me since the night began. I woke to the soft sound of tapping on my window, rhythmic and persistent. My eyes snapped open, heart racing, as I sat up and turned to look. The lot outside was still empty, the pale light of dawn just beginning to stretch across the sky. No one was there. My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the area, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. I tried to shake off the chill that had crept into my bones, convincing myself it was just the wind or maybe a bird. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking spot, trying to focus on the road ahead. But the unease lingered, gnawing at me, making it difficult to concentrate. The tapping had been too precise, too deliberate. It wasn't just the wind. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but the lot was still empty, and I was the only one on the road. As I drove away from the truck stop, I tried to calm myself, focusing on the steady hum of the tires on the asphalt. The sky was just beginning to lighten, and the landscape outside was bathed in a soft, eerie glow. I reached for the radio, hoping some music might help settle my nerves, but before I could find a station, my eyes drifted back to the rearview mirror. That's when I saw them tire tracks in the dirt, following my exact path. I blinked, rubbing my eyes as I glanced back again, but the tracks were still there. They were fresh, unmistakably recent, and they matched the path I had just taken. The problem was, I had been the only vehicle in the lot when I parked. There had been no trucks behind me when I pulled in, and yet here were the tracks as if another truck had followed me out. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed the car, trying to make sense of it. I looked around, half expecting to see another truck pulling up behind me, but the road ahead was still empty. I couldn't explain it. I hadn't seen anyone leave the lot after I parked, and there was no sign of any other vehicles when I had woken up. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone else had parked and left before I woke up. But something about the tracks felt deliberate, as if whoever had been behind me had been watching. I decided to pull over at the next rest area, hoping to clear my head. As I slowed to a stop, I noticed the tracks again, this time more clearly. They weren't just following my path, they were too precise, too exact. They mirrored my every move, like someone had been right behind me, matching my speed and turns. I sat there for a moment, staring at the tracks, trying to make sense of it all. It didn't make sense. There was no other truck in sight, no sign of anyone else. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the edge of the road, looking at the tracks more closely. They were deep in the dirt, unmistakable. But as I crouched down to get a better look, I heard a faint sound behind me. It was the unmistakable rumble of an engine, growing louder with each passing second. My stomach twisted as I stood up, my eyes darting to the road. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. No truck, no car, no sign of anyone at all. I quickly got back in the car and locked the doors, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. My mind raced with possibilities. Was I being followed? Was someone messing with me, or was this something more? I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was out there, watching me. I pulled back onto the road, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see something, anything, but the road behind me was still empty. The tire tracks seemed to stretch on forever in my mind, a constant reminder of what I had seen. They had been there when I woke up, and they were still there now, lingering in my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been waiting for me, following me, or perhaps even anticipating my every move. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine, but I couldn't stop driving. The road stretched out ahead of me, and all I wanted was to put the truck stop and whatever had happened there behind me. As I continued down the highway, I tried to focus on the road, but the unease gnawed at me. The tracks kept replaying in my mind, and every flicker of movement in my mirrors sent my heart into overdrive. I kept expecting to see headlights behind me, to hear the rumble of a truck closing in. But the road remained empty, just the sound of my engine and the hum of the tires. Hours passed, and the sun slowly climbed higher in the sky. The strange feeling that had followed me since I left the truck stop began to fade, but I couldn't shake the memory of those tire tracks.